The air in the auditorium hung heavy with expectation. West Point Military Academy had spared no expense for the 30th anniversary commemoration of Operation Desert Storm. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the walls. Polished brass gleamed under the lights. The room was packed with crisp uniforms and attentive faces of cadets who had not yet been born when American tanks had thundered across the Iraqi desert. At the center of it all sat a pristine M1 Abrams tank on a raised platform. Its desert camouflage had been meticulously restored, every detail perfect down to the unit markings. The machine dominated the space, 15 feet tall and weighing over 60 tons, a sleeping metal giant amidst the crowd. Colonel William Carter, known throughout his career as Iron Bill, sat in the front row. At 65, his once broad shoulders still held military bearing despite the passage of time. His weathered face bore the lines of 3 decades of sun, wind, and the weight of command. Hands that once guided tank controls now rested quietly on his knees. Only the slight tapping of his right index finger betrayed any emotion as the Academy superintendent droned through his prepared remarks. Carter wore his dress uniform with quiet pride, the rows of ribbons telling a story few men could match. Desert Storm, Somalia, Bosnia, Afghanistan, Iraq again. The fruits of a career spanning almost 4 decades, from West Point cadet to tank commander to finally colonel. His silver hair had been cut yesterday, military short as always. Some habits never changed. The superintendent was calling his name. Carter rose with practiced precision and made his way to the podium. The applause felt distant as his eyes locked onto the Abrams. Not just any Abrams. His Abrams. The vehicle identification number was concealed by a fresh coat of paint, but Carter would know her anywhere. The slight dent in the turret ring, the uniquely shaped weld on the right track guard, the replacement panel on the engine deck with its slightly mismatched paint. Iron Thunder, he whispered under his breath, using the name his crew had painted on her barrel all those years ago. A name officially removed from military records, but never from his memory. The microphone amplified his voice as he turned to face the audience. His prepared speech sat folded in his pocket, untouched. Looking out at the young faces, Carter made a decision. They deserved the truth, not the sanitized history found in textbooks. "Thank you for this honor," he began, his voice carrying the graveled texture of command. "I'm supposed to talk about leadership today, about tactics and strategy, about how American engineering and training overwhelmed the 4th largest army in the world in a matter of days." Carter paused, his eyes scanning the audience until he found a particular cadet in the 3rd row. His grandson, James, sat straight-backed and attentive, hanging on every word. The boy had his father's eyes and his grandfather's jawline. 3 generations of West Point men. The sight solidified his resolve. "Instead, I want to tell you about a battle that isn't in your textbooks, a mission that officially never happened, the real reason I'm standing here today, and why that tank means more than just steel and engineering." A murmur passed through the audience. The superintendent shifted uncomfortably in his chair behind Carter. This was not the approved speech. February 1991, we were 3 days into the ground war in Iraq. The auditorium faded away, replaced by memories as vivid as yesterday. Sand stung Lieutenant Colonel William Carter's face despite the protective goggles. The desert night was bitterly cold, the temperature having plummeted after sunset. He stood outside the command tent at Forward Operating Base Aero, studying a map spread across the hood of his Humvee. Red markers indicated the rapid advance of American forces. Saddam's vaunted Republican Guard was crumbling faster than even the most optimistic Pentagon predictions. Carter had slept perhaps 4 hours in the past 3 days. Coffee no longer affected him. Exhaustion had become his natural state. Yet adrenaline kept him sharp, focused. His unit, the 3rd Armored Battalion, had spearheaded the advance, destroying 27 Iraqi tanks without a single American casualty. The talk of a quick victory was beginning to seem not just possible but inevitable. "Sir," Major Donovan approached, his face illuminated by the red-filtered flashlight Carter used to preserve their night vision. "General Johnson is requesting your presence in the secure comms tent. Says it's urgent." Carter folded the map. "Any idea what this is about, Mike?" "No, sir, but there's a CIA spook with him, arrived by Blackhawk 20 minutes ago." Carter felt his stomach tighten. CIA involvement typically meant complications, and complications meant risk to his men. "Keep the coffee hot. I have a feeling we're not getting any sleep tonight." The secure communications tent sat isolated at the edge of the fob. Two MPs stood guard outside, checking identification with unusual thoroughness. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. General Johnson, commander of the 1st Armored Division, stood over a metal case that hadn't been there during the morning briefing. A man in civilian clothes sat beside it, his desert khakis unmarked by insignia or identification. "Colonel Carter," Johnson said without preamble, "this is Mr. Reynolds. He has operational authority directly from CENTCOM. What you're about to hear does not leave this tent." Reynolds didn't rise or offer his hand. His eyes assessed Carter with clinical detachment. "Colonel, are you familiar with the T-72 M1 tank?" Reynolds asked. "Iraqi main battle tank. Soviet export model. Decent armor but inferior optics. My Abrams can engage and destroy them at ranges beyond their ability to effectively return fire." Reynolds nodded. "And what about the T-72 M1B? Carter frowned. "There's no such designation in our threat assessment briefs." Reynolds opened the metal case and removed a folder marked with top-secret designations Carter had never seen before. He slid several photographs across the table. They showed what appeared to be a standard T-72, but with significant modifications to the turret and hull. 3 weeks ago, a Kurdish informant provided intel that the Iraqis had received a prototype tank from the Soviets. Not just an export model, but a next-generation vehicle with capabilities matching or exceeding our M1 A1. We didn't believe it until our satellites captured these images at a facility 200 miles northwest of Baghdad. Carter studied the photos. The differences were subtle but significant to a trained eye. The turret profile was sleeker. The main gun appeared longer, likely a higher velocity 125 mm. The armor configuration suggested composite or reactive plates rather than standard steel. "This can't be Soviet," Carter said. "They wouldn't export their best technology, especially not now with the USSR disintegrating." "It's not officially Soviet," Reynolds confirmed. "Our intelligence suggests this is a black market technology transfer. Former KGB elements working with Iraqi intelligence. The collapse of the Soviet Union has created opportunity for enterprising individuals with access to military secrets." General Johnson spoke up. "The reason you're here, Bill, is that we've confirmed the Iraqis have deployed 5 of these vehicles to a Republican Guard unit directly in the path of our advance. Standard tactics won't work. These tanks have thermal imaging systems as good as ours, improved Contact 5 reactive armor that can defeat our standard depleted uranium rounds, and an autoloader that increases their rate of fire. With all due respect, General, my tankers can handle this threat. We adjust our tactics, use our mobility advantage, engage from multiple angles to defeat the reactive armor." Reynolds shook his head. "You're not understanding the gravity of this, Colonel. These tanks aren't just a tactical threat. They're a strategic one. If they prove effective against our Abrams, it undermines the entire technological superiority we've built our strategy upon. Worse, if one is captured intact by our forces, the advanced Soviet technology inside could reveal capabilities we didn't know they had developed." Carter looked between Reynolds and the general. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "We need those tanks eliminated," Reynolds said. "Not just disabled, completely destroyed in a way that leaves no technology to be recovered. And we need it done quietly, without revealing to the Iraqis that we specifically targeted these prototypes." "Or to our allies," General Johnson added quietly. Carter understood the subtext. This was about more than the current conflict. This was about the future balance of power in a post-Cold War world. America had emerged as the sole superpower, and the Pentagon wanted to keep it that way. "You're sending my men behind enemy lines to hunt specific tanks without alerting the Iraqis that we know they exist?" "Not your men, Colonel," Reynolds corrected. "A small, specialized team. We can't risk a large force that might be detected. You'll take your best tank crew, plus 2 specialists I brought with me. Quick insertion, precision strike, immediate extraction." "When?" "Tonight. Our intel says the tanks are being moved to the front tomorrow." Carter felt the familiar weight of command settle onto his shoulders. "I'll need everything you have on these tanks. Weaknesses, movement patterns, protective details." "It's all in here," Reynolds tapped the folder. "Memorize it. The contents can't leave this tent." As Carter began to read, his mind was already cycling through crew selections. His gunner, Sergeant Wilson, had the best hit percentage in the battalion. Rodriguez could drive a 70-ton tank through terrain that would stop most commercial vehicles. Anderson knew the Abrams weapon systems better than the engineers who designed them. The 3 men had been with him for 5 years, through countless training exercises and now combat. They were more family than subordinates. He thought of his Riddle family too. Sarah, his wife of 20 years, who served as a military nurse at the field hospital 30 miles south. Their son David, now a freshman at West Point, following his father's footsteps. The photograph in Carter's breast pocket seemed to grow heavier. One more thing, Reynolds said, interrupting his thoughts. This mission doesn't exist. If you're captured, the U.S. government will deny any knowledge of your operation. You'll be listed as having gone rogue, possibly defecting. Carter met the CIA man's gaze without flinching. My men deserve to know the risks. Your men follow orders, Colonel. That's what they signed up for. No. Carter's voice took on the edge that had earned him his nickname. They signed up to defend their country with honor. I won't lie to them about the stakes. Reynolds looked to General Johnson, who shrugged. It's your mission, but Bill picks his team and briefs them his way. That's non-negotiable. Fine, Reynolds conceded, but operational security is absolute. No communication with anyone outside the mission team until you return. Carter nodded and returned to studying the intelligence report. The modified T-72s had one potential weakness: their engine cooling system. Soviet tanks traditionally ran hot, and adding advanced electronics likely exacerbated the problem. A precision shot to the rear grille might penetrate to the engine compartment, creating a catastrophic failure that would destroy the sensitive electronics. It was a slim chance, but it was something. Carter had built his career on turning slim chances into victories. 2 hours later, Carter stood before his selected team in a secluded maintenance tent. His 4 regular crew members plus 2 specialists Reynolds had brought: Technical Sergeant Miller, an expert in Soviet armor, and Captain Roberts, a demolitions specialist with Delta Force. Gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is classified above top secret, Carter began. This mission is voluntary. Anyone who wants to walk away can do so now. No questions asked, no impact on your record. No one moved. All right then, we're going hunting for tanks. Carter laid out the mission parameters. They would take a single M1 Abrams, modified with additional fuel tanks and stripped of identifying markings. A stealth helicopter would insert them 30 miles behind enemy lines. From there, they would proceed to the target location, destroy the 5 prototype tanks, and rendezvous with extraction forces near the Saudi border. Questions? Carter asked after outlining the plan. Sergeant Wilson, a career soldier 3 months from retirement, spoke first. What makes these tanks so special? We're risking our necks to take them out? Carter appreciated the directness. They have technology that could change the balance of power if it falls into the wrong hands. More practically, they could kill a lot of Americans if they reach the front. So why not just call in an airstrike? Asked Rodriguez, their driver. Politics, Carter answered honestly. We're not supposed to know these tanks exist. An airstrike would reveal our intelligence capabilities. Technical Sergeant Miller cleared his throat. There's also the matter of confirmation. We need visual verification that the targets are destroyed. These prototypes look very similar to standard T-72s from the air. Carter nodded. Any other questions? Anderson, their weapons specialist, tapped the map. Extraction plan, if the primary fails? Secondary LZ here. Carter indicated a position 10 miles south of the primary. If that's compromised, we head to the Saudi border and call for emergency extraction. Worst case, we ditch the tank and proceed on foot. The men exchanged glances. They all knew what worst case really meant in hostile territory. Capture, torture, execution, likely filmed for propaganda. Last chance to back out, Carter said quietly. Sergeant Wilson spat on the ground. With respect, sir, when do we leave? Carter felt a surge of pride. Wheels up in 30. Pack light, but pack smart. This isn't a standard operation. As the men dispersed to prepare, Reynolds approached Carter. Your crew seems capable, but are you sure about Wilson? He's got a family retirement coming up. Wilson is the best gunner in the division. We'll need him if those tanks are as good as your intelligence claims. Reynolds studied him. This isn't just about the tanks, is it, Colonel? This is personal for you. Carter's jaw tightened. My job is to complete the mission and bring my men home. That's as personal as it gets. There's more at stake here than you realize, Reynolds said cryptically. Just make sure your judgment isn't clouded by sentiment. Before Carter could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. An MP rushed into the tent. Sir, there's been a security breach. Someone accessed the secure communications tent after your briefing. Carter and Reynolds exchanged alarmed glances. What was taken? Reynolds demanded. Nothing, sir, but the duty officer reports finding the map case open when he returned from his patrol. Reynolds cursed. The mission's compromised. We have to abort. No, Carter said firmly. If those tanks reach the front, American lives are at risk. We proceed as planned, but we assume the enemy might be expecting us. That's suicide, Reynolds protested. That's war, Carter countered. We adjust and overcome. General Johnson, who had entered during the exchange, nodded his agreement. Colonel Carter has operational authority now. The mission proceeds. Reynolds looked like he wanted to argue further, but instead stormed out of the tent. Carter felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. Something wasn't right about this operation, but he couldn't place what was bothering him. Sir, Donovan approached, speaking low. I've been checking the intel. Some of it doesn't add up. Explain. The satellite photos are authentic, but the timestamp metadata has been altered. These images are at least 6 months old, not 3 weeks. Carter processed this information. Why would Reynolds lie about the timing? I don't know, sir, but there's something else. I ran a background check on him through a buddy at Pentagon Intelligence. Reynolds was stationed in Moscow as a military attaché until 1989. He has extensive connections to Soviet military officials. The pieces began to form a disturbing picture. You think he's working both sides? I think we should watch our backs, sir. Carter nodded grimly. Keep this between us for now. I need to think. As Donovan left, Carter unfolded a personal photo he kept in his wallet. Sarah and David smiled back at him from happier times, a fishing trip in Montana 3 years ago. He had promised Sarah this would be his last deployment, that after Desert Storm, he'd take that teaching position at Fort Knox and finally be home for more than a few months at a stretch. Now he was volunteering for a mission that might ensure he never came home at all. Carter tucked the photo back into his pocket and headed for the motor pool where his tank was being prepared. Iron Thunder gleamed under the work lights, her desert camouflage fresh, her 120mm main gun elevated for maintenance. The most advanced main battle tank in the world, crewed by the best men he'd ever served with. If anyone could pull this off, they could. Technical Sergeant Miller was already there, inspecting the modifications to the tank's fuel system. Carter noticed him paying particular attention to the targeting computer. Everything meeting specifications, Sergeant? Miller straightened quickly. Yes, sir. Just making sure the fire control system is calibrated for the environmental conditions we'll be facing. Carter nodded, but something in Miller's demeanor raised his suspicions. The man was too nervous, too focused on the tank's electronics. Carry on, Carter said, moving past to where his crew was preparing their personal gear. Wilson looked up from cleaning his sidearm. At 48, he was the oldest of the crew, with silver at his temples and a perpetual 3-day stubble. The Army somehow never made him shave. Everything okay, sir? You've got that look. What look is that, Sergeant? The one you had before we hit that minefield in training at Grafenwohr. Like you're smelling trouble before it arrives. Carter had learned long ago to trust Wilson's instincts as much as his own. Keep your eyes open on this one. Something feels off. Wilson nodded. No further explanation needed between men who had served together as long as they had. Rodriguez approached, his compact frame belying the strength needed to manage the tank's controls hour after hour. Vehicles ready, Colonel. Extra fuel stripped of identifiers. Communications modified to encrypt all transmissions. Ammunition, Carter asked. Standard load plus extra depleted uranium rounds for the main gun. If these Soviet tanks are as tough as they say, we'll need the penetration power. Anderson joined them, his arms filled with additional gear. I've added thermite grenades to our kits, sir. If we need to destroy evidence of our presence, they'll melt through steel in seconds. Carter inspected their preparations and found everything in order. These men were professionals, the best the Army had to offer, yet the knot in his stomach wouldn't dissipate. At exactly midnight, they gathered at the helicopter landing zone. A modified Black Hawk with sound suppression equipment waited, its rotors already turning. Captain Roberts, the Delta Force demolitions expert, stood by the cargo door. We've got a narrow window, he shouted over the engine noise. Iraqi radar has a gap between 0030 and 0045 when their technicians change shifts. We need to be over the insertion point by then. The tank was already loaded onto a heavy transport helicopter that would follow them in. Carter took one last look around the base, the ordered chaos of an army at war. Then he boarded the helicopter and put on the offered headset. Reynolds sat opposite, his face illuminated by the red interior lights. Last chance to reconsider, Colonel. Once we cross the line, there's no turning back. My men are committed, Carter replied. So am I. The helicopter lifted off, banking north toward enemy territory. Below, the desert stretched endlessly, occasionally broken by the lights of American military vehicles advancing toward the Iraqi border. Soon those lights faded, replaced by the absolute darkness of the unoccupied desert. Carter closed his eyes, running through the mission details one more time. The coordinates, the approach vectors, the firing solutions needed to ensure complete destruction of the target vehicles. Every contingency, every fallback option. He was so deep in thought that he almost missed the subtle shift in the helicopter's course. His eyes snapped open. They were heading northwest now, not due north as the mission plan specified. "We're off course," he said into his headset. The pilot's voice came back, tense. "Orders from command, sir. The insertion point has been compromised. We're proceeding to the secondary LZ." Carter looked at Reynolds, who avoided his gaze. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. He switched to a private channel with Donovan. "Mike, run a communications check with base. Verify the course change order." "Already tried, sir. There's interference on all frequencies. Could be Iraqi electronic warfare or someone doesn't want us talking to headquarters," Carter finished. "Stay alert." 30 minutes later, the helicopter began its descent. Through the window, Carter could make out the moonlit contours of a ridgeline that didn't match their briefing materials. This wasn't the secondary LZ either. As they touched down, Carter grabbed Reynolds by the arm. "Where the hell are we?" "Operational security required a change in plans," Reynolds replied smoothly. "The target vehicles have moved. We're adapting." Carter's instincts screamed danger, but they were already on the ground in enemy territory. The heavy transport helicopter was landing nearby, the tank their only realistic means of completing the mission and returning safely. "Anderson, Rodriguez, secure the perimeter," Carter ordered. "Wilson, stay with me. Captain Roberts, prepare the tank for offloading." As his men moved to comply, Carter pulled Donovan aside. "I don't like this. As soon as the tank is down, establish communications with base using the emergency frequencies. I want verification of our new orders." "Yes, sir," Donovan replied, his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. The tank was quickly offloaded, its massive form incongruously graceful as it settled onto the desert floor. Carter did a quick inspection, finding everything in order, or almost everything. "Where's Technical Sergeant Miller?" he asked. Reynolds scanned the area. "He was right behind me on the helicopter." A sudden burst of gunfire answered the question. Miller emerged from behind a dune, an Iraqi soldier's body falling at his feet. "Patrol," he gasped. "I got him before he could radio our position." Carter's hand went to his own sidearm. One patrol might be explained away. The course change, the communications interference, the location discrepancy. Too many coincidences. "Everyone mount up," he ordered. "We're moving out now." As they climbed aboard Iron Thunder, Carter pulled Wilson close. "Don't take your eyes off Miller or Reynolds. Something's not right." Wilson nodded, his weathered face grim. Never trusted spooks anyway. Inside the tank, Carter took his commander's position, the familiar confines of the turret both comforting and confining. Rodriguez started the massive turbine engine, its distinctive whine rising as it powered up. Anderson manned the loader's station, while Wilson settled into the gunner's seat, hands automatically finding the controls for the main gun. "Comms check," Carter said, testing the tank's internal communication system. "Driver ready," Rodriguez reported. "Gunner ready," from Wilson. "Loader ready," Anderson confirmed. Donovan, Miller, Reynolds, and Roberts were following in the Humvee they had brought for reconnaissance purposes. "Move out," Carter ordered. "Heading 270. Maintain tactical speed." As the tank began to roll forward, Carter scanned the horizon through his vision blocks. The Iraqi desert at night was a world of shadows and imagined threats. Perfect terrain for an ambush. "Sir," Wilson's voice came through the intercom. "I've been thinking about those modified T-72s. If they really have enhanced thermal imaging, they'll see us coming from miles away in open terrain." "That's why we're not using open terrain," Carter replied. "We're going to use the wadis and ridgelines for cover, approach from their blind spot." "And if they don't have a blind spot?" Carter allowed himself a grim smile. "Everything has a blind spot, Sergeant, even us." As they crested the first rise, the tank's thermal imaging system revealed the landscape ahead in ghostly green contrast. No sign of enemy vehicles or troops, but something caught Carter's attention. Fresh track marks, too wide for standard military vehicles. "Hold position," he ordered. "Rodriguez, shut down the engine." In the sudden silence, they could hear the distant rumble of heavy vehicles. "Contact bearing 185, Wilson reported, swinging the turret south. "Multiple heat signatures, big ones." Carter switched to the commander's independent thermal viewer. 5 distinct shapes moved across the desert floor 2 miles away. The silhouettes were unmistakable. Tanks, but not T-72s. "Those are Abrams," he said in disbelief. American M1 A1s. Impossible, Wilson breathed. There are no friendly units operating in this sector. Carter's mind raced through the possibilities. Captured American tanks? Iraqi decoys? Or something more sinister? The radio crackled to life, a voice speaking in accented English. Iron Thunder, this is Dagger Actual. Maintain your position. Repeat, maintain your position. Authentication code Sierra Lima 729er. It was a valid American authentication code. Carter felt the knot in his stomach tighten. Who is Dagger Actual? He asked his crew. That's not in our mission briefing. Before anyone could respond, the Humvee pulled alongside the tank. Reynolds climbed out and approached, waving for Carter to open his hatch. Against his better judgment, Carter popped the commander's hatch and raised himself up to see Reynolds. We've got a situation, Reynolds said, his voice low and urgent. Those aren't Iraqi tanks. They're American, part of a black ops team that's been operating behind enemy lines for weeks. They're here to assist us. That's not possible, Carter replied. I know every American armored unit in theater. There is no Dagger Actual in the order of battle. Reynolds' expression hardened. There's a lot you don't know about this operation, Colonel. Now get your tank moving and link up with those vehicles or I'll have you relieved of command. Carter stared at the CIA operative, the pieces finally clicking into place. This isn't about destroying prototype Soviet tanks. This is something else entirely. What are we really doing here, Reynolds? Instead of answering, Reynolds reached inside his jacket. Carter reacted instantly, dropping back into the tank and slamming the hatch closed. All stations? Combat positions, he barked. Possible hostile intent from our CIA friends. Outside, Reynolds was shouting into a radio. The approaching Abrams tanks had increased their speed, now clearly moving to surround Iron Thunder. Sir, Rodriguez called from the driver's station. Those tanks are running without lights or proper IFF transponders. Protocol violation for friendly forces. Because they're not friendly, Carter replied grimly. Wilson, target the lead vehicle. Sabot round, center mass. Sir? Wilson's voice betrayed his shock. Those are American tanks. No American unit would operate this way, Carter said with certainty. This is a setup. Reynolds, Miller, all of it. We've been played. The radio came alive again. Iron Thunder, lower your weapons and power down immediately. This is your final warning. Carter had seconds to make a decision that would define the rest of his life. Fire on what appeared to be American tanks, or surrender and potentially face charges of treason if Reynolds had set them up. The answer came in the form of a muzzle flash from the lead tank. A round screamed overhead, deliberately high, a warning shot. That settles it, Carter said. No American tanker would fire a warning shot at another American vehicle. Wilson, take the shot. On target, Wilson confirmed, his voice steady once more. Fire. The Abrams rocked as its 120mm main gun roared. The depleted uranium round covered the distance in an eye blink, striking the lead tank precisely where Wilson had aimed. Instead of penetrating, however, the round deflected with a shower of sparks. What the hell? Wilson exclaimed. Carter zoomed in with his thermal viewer. The impact point glowed brightly, revealing something unexpected. That's not standard armor. Rodriguez, get us moving now. Evasive pattern Delta. The tank lurched into motion as a volley of return fire kicked up sand around them. Carter's mind worked furiously to process what he was seeing. The tanks had the silhouette of Abrams, but the armor reaction wasn't consistent with any known variant, and their fire control seemed off, rounds landing with less precision than American gunners would display. They're not Abrams, he realized aloud. They're mock-ups, detailed ones, but the proportions are slightly wrong. Someone built convincing decoys. Who would do that? Anderson asked, slamming another round into the breech. Someone who wanted American tanks to fire on what appeared to be American tanks, Carter replied, creating an incident that could be used for propaganda or worse. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about stolen Soviet technology. This was psychological warfare on a level Carter had never encountered. New targeting point, he instructed Wilson. Lower front plate, just above the track. That's a weak point on most tanks regardless of type. Wilson adjusted his aim. On target. Fire. This time the round struck home, penetrating the target's hull. The vehicle immediately began to burn, confirming Carter's suspicion. No Abrams would ignite so quickly from a single penetration. All stations, these are hostile vehicles disguised as American tanks, Carter announced. Engage at will, but be advised we are likely being recorded. This is a propaganda operation. His crew responded with professional precision. Wilson engaged a second target while Rodriguez maneuvered to present their strongest armor toward the remaining enemies. Anderson loaded rounds with fluid efficiency. Outside, Carter could see Reynolds and Miller fleeing in the Humvee, abandoning Captain Roberts and Major Donovan. The betrayal was complete. Rodriguez, intercept that Humvee, Carter ordered. They're not getting away with whatever game they're playing. The Abrams surged forward, its superior mobility allowing it to quickly cut off the escaping vehicle. Reynolds and Miller bailed out, running in opposite directions. Sir, Donovan's voice came over the radio. Roberts is down. They shot him before running. Carter's decision was immediate. Anderson, take over the main gun. Wilson, man the 50 cal and cover me. I'm going after Reynolds. Ignoring the protests of his crew, Carter grabbed his personal sidearm, popped the hatch, and dropped to the ground. The night air was filled with the smell of burning metal and cordite. In the distance, the three remaining fake Abrams were retreating, their mission compromised. Carter moved through the darkness with the skill of a career soldier, tracking Reynolds by the disturbed sand and occasional footprint. He found the CIA man crouched behind a rock formation, frantically working a satellite phone. That's far enough, Reynolds, Carter said, his pistol aimed center mass. Reynolds looked up, his face contorted with anger and fear. You don't understand what you've done, Carter. This operation was years in the making. What operation? Because it sure as hell wasn't about destroying prototype Soviet tanks. Reynolds laughed bitterly. Soviet tanks? Is that what you thought this was about? This was about the future, Carter, about ensuring American military supremacy for decades to come. By having American forces fire on mock American tanks, that's not strategy, that's treason. It's necessary, Reynolds spat. The Cold War is ending. Without the Soviet threat, Congress will slash military budgets. Our technological advantage will erode. We needed an incident, proof that our enemies are developing countermeasures to our most advanced systems. Carter felt cold despite the desert night. You staged this entire operation to secure funding? Americans died tonight, Reynolds. Acceptable losses for the greater good, Reynolds replied, his hand moving slowly toward a concealed weapon. Carter saw the motion and adjusted his aim. Don't. Reynolds froze. You're a military man, Carter. You understand sacrifice. What's a few lives weighed against national security? That's not your call to make, Carter said. And it's not sacrifice when you're not the one dying. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Reynolds lunged for his weapon. Carter fired once, the shot echoing across the desert. Reynolds collapsed, clutching his shoulder. You should have killed me, Reynolds gasped through gritted teeth. That's the difference between us, Carter replied, kicking Reynolds' weapon away. I still believe in the rule of law. You're going to stand trial for what you've done. Carter zip-tied Reynolds' hands and retrieved the satellite phone. As he was about to return to the tank, he noticed writing on the back of the device. Not English, Russian Cyrillic characters. You're working with the Russians, Carter said, the final piece falling into place. This isn't about American military funding. This is about creating discord within NATO, making it look like America is manufacturing threats. Reynolds' silence was confirmation enough. Sir, Wilson's voice called from nearby. We've got company. Iraqi patrol coming in fast from the east. Carter dragged Reynolds to his feet. Looks like your friends have abandoned you to the Iraqis. Let's go. They made it back to the tank as tracer fire began to stitch the darkness around them. Captain Roberts had been loaded inside, badly wounded but alive. Miller was nowhere to be seen. Miller? Carter asked as he shoved Reynolds into the tank. Got away during the firefight, Wilson reported. Headed north on foot. We'll worry about him later. Mount up and prepare to move. We need to reach the extraction point before dawn. As the crew returned to their stations, Donovan pulled Carter aside. Sir, Roberts managed to tell me something before he lost consciousness. He's not Delta Force. He's Defense Intelligence Agency. He was investigating Reynolds for suspected espionage. Carter nodded grimly. That fits. Reynolds was working with the Russians, using this operation to create an international incident. The question is why? What does Russia gain from this? Chaos, Donovan suggested. The Soviet Union is collapsing. Maybe hardliners are trying to reignite Cold War tensions to maintain military control. Or prevent the peace dividend from reaching the West, Carter added. Keep us spending on weapons instead of rebuilding their economy. The sound of approaching vehicles cut their speculations short. Carter climbed into his commander's position. All stations, prepare for combat. We're fighting our way home. As Iron Thunder's engine roared to life, Carter thought of the photo in his pocket. Sarah and David, he had promised to come home. Now that promise seemed far more difficult to keep. The Abrams surged forward, its 120mm gun traversing to target the lead Iraqi vehicle. In the commander's seat, Colonel William Carter felt the familiar calm of combat clarity. The mission had changed, but the objective remained the same. Survive, complete the mission, bring his men home, and ensure the truth was told, no matter the cost. "Gunner Sabat, vehicle," he ordered. "On the way," Wilson responded. The main gun roared, and Iron Thunder charged into battle, outgunned and outnumbered, but unwavering in purpose. Back in the West Point auditorium, Colonel William Carter paused in his narrative. The room was silent, cadets and officers alike hanging on his every word. The story he was telling diverged significantly from the official history of Operation Desert Storm. "What happened next is a matter of record, though not the record you'll find in your textbooks," he continued. "Iron Thunder fought through 16 hours of continuous combat. We destroyed 11 Iraqi vehicles, captured evidence of a Russian disinformation operation, and made it to the Saudi border with 3 wounded crew members and a traitor in custody." Carter's gaze fell on the Abrams tank displayed on the stage. That tank carried us through hell and back. Not because of its technology or firepower, though both were exceptional, but because of the men inside it. Men who faced impossible odds and refused to break. He turned back to the audience. "The official report of that night states that our unit was conducting a routine reconnaissance mission that encountered unexpected resistance. Reynolds died of his wounds before he could be questioned. Miller was never found. The evidence we recovered was classified and locked away." Carter's voice dropped, becoming more personal. "I'm telling you this now because the 30-year classification has finally expired. Because the truth matters. Because you deserve to know that sometimes serving your country means questioning orders. Sometimes patriotism means standing against those who would corrupt our values in the name of protecting them." The superintendent was standing now, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of Carter's speech. But the old tanker wasn't finished. "Look at that machine," Carter gestured to the Abrams. 70 tons of American ingenuity and power. But it's nothing without the moral courage of the people who operate it. Technology changes. Weapons evolve. The fundamental requirement of leadership does not. The courage to do what's right, especially when it's difficult. Carter straightened to attention, his bearing that of the young officer he had once been. "That's the legacy I want to leave you with today. Not just stories of battle, but the understanding that your most important weapon will always be your integrity." The auditorium erupted in applause, cadets rising to their feet in respect not just for a decorated veteran, but for the unvarnished truth he had shared. As Carter made his way back to his seat, his grandson James met his eyes. The young man's face showed a new understanding, a deeper appreciation for the uniform he wore and the responsibility it represented. Carter nodded slightly, a private acknowledgement between them. The legacy would continue, not of blind obedience, but of principled service. Of steel and fire, yes, but most importantly, of the unbreakable human spirit that guided them. The legacy of men who faced the darkness and held true to their course, no matter the cost. The legacy of Iron Thunder. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Iron Thunder as it crested a small rise in the barren landscape. Colonel William Carter scanned the horizon through his commander's viewport, the heat distortion creating wavering mirages in the distance. They had been moving for 6 hours since the firefight with the disguised tanks and Iraqi patrol, maintaining radio silence and using the terrain to mask their movement. "Water check," Carter ordered over the intercom. Dehydration was as deadly an enemy as any Iraqi force. 2 gallons per man, sir," Anderson reported from the loader's station. "Plus what's in our personal canteens." Carter nodded, though no one could see the gesture. In the desert heat, with the tank's interior pushing 120 degrees, they were consuming water at an alarming rate. They had enough for perhaps another day if they rationed carefully. "Rodriguez, find us some shade. We need to cool the engine and ourselves." "Yes, sir," the driver responded, already steering toward a rock formation that offered a sliver of protection from the relentless sun. As the tank rumbled to a stop, Carter checked on their prisoners. Reynolds lay unconscious in the turret basket, his wounded shoulder bandaged but still seeping blood. They had given him morphine from the first aid kit, but his condition was deteriorating. Captain Roberts was worse, his breathing shallow and labored from the gunshot wound to his chest. "Mike," Carter addressed Donovan, "take Wilson and scout the perimeter. 300 meters, no more. I want to know if there's any pursuit." As his men prepared to exit the stifling heat of the tank, Carter contemplated their situation. They were deep in enemy territory with minimal supplies, 2 wounded men, a compromised mission, and evidence of a Russian disinformation operation that could have international repercussions if revealed. Their extraction plan was built on assumptions that no longer applied. They couldn't trust any communication channels that might have been compromised by Reynolds or his associates. The mission had transformed from a surgical strike against prototype tanks to a desperate fight for survival and truth. Donovan and Wilson returned 20 minutes later, their uniforms drenched with sweat, but their expressions alert. "No signs of pursuit, sir," Donovan reported. "But we found something interesting. There's a small village about 2 kilometers northeast. Looks abandoned." "Could be a trap," Carter mused, considering their options. "But we need supplies and a secure position to treat the wounded." Wilson cleared his throat. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" "Always, Sergeant. Roberts isn't going to make it without proper medical attention. And frankly, I'm not sure we should be working too hard to save Reynolds." Carter understood the sentiment. Reynolds' betrayal had endangered all their lives and compromised a military operation. But Carter had spent 25 years living by a code that didn't allow for battlefield justice. "We bring them both back to face proper judgment," Carter said firmly. "That's what separates us from them, Sergeant." Wilson nodded, his weathered face revealing respect despite his disagreement. "Yes, sir." Carter turned to the map spread across his knees, tracing their position and the route to the Saudi border. "We'll check out the village. If it's clear, we'll use it as a temporary base to regroup and plan our next move. Rodriguez, keep the engine at idle. If this goes sideways, I want immediate extraction." "Understood, Colonel." Carter, Donovan, Wilson, and Anderson moved cautiously through the desert terrain toward the village, using the natural contours for cover. As they approached, the abandoned nature of the settlement became apparent. Doors hung open on empty houses. A rusted truck sat with its hood raised, picked clean of usable parts. The Iraqi regime had likely relocated the inhabitants, a common practice in border areas where loyalty might be questionable. They cleared each building methodically, finding no threats but also few useful supplies. In what appeared to have been a small clinic, they discovered a cache of basic medical supplies: bandages, antiseptic, and outdated medications. "Better than nothing," Donovan commented as they gathered the materials. The most valuable discovery came in what had once been the village's general store. A trapdoor beneath a dusty counter revealed a small cellar containing sealed containers of water, preserved food, and even a shortwave radio. "Smugglers," Wilson suggested, examining the radio. "This place was probably a waypoint for moving goods across the border." Carter nodded. "And now it's our waypoint. Anderson, signal Rodriguez to bring the tank in. We'll use that large storage building for cover and set up a temporary command post here." Within an hour, Iron Thunder was concealed inside the largest structure in the village, canvas tarps further breaking up its distinctive silhouette. The wounded men were moved to the more sanitary environment of the former clinic, and Carter established a command center in the store. The shortwave radio was their most valuable find. If they could establish contact with friendly forces without using their compromised military channels, they might arrange extraction without alerting any remaining conspirators. "Can you make it work?" Carter asked Wilson, who was examining the radio's components. "Maybe. It's old, but the basic elements are sound. I'll need a few hours." "You have 2, Carter replied, checking his watch. "The sun sets in 3 hours. I want to be ready to move by then." As Wilson worked on the radio, Carter pulled Donovan aside. "We need to talk about what happens next. Assuming we make it back across the border, this isn't over." Donovan nodded grimly. Reynolds wasn't working alone. Someone higher up had to approve this operation, provide the resources. "Exactly. We have evidence of a Russian operation on Iraqi soil using American equipment and personnel. That implicates people in our own command structure." "Who do we trust?" Donovan asked the question that had been haunting them both. Carter considered carefully. "General Johnson assigned us this mission, but did he know what it really was? And who else might be involved? The Defense Intelligence Agency sent Roberts, so there must be elements investigating this already." "Sir," Anderson interrupted, "you need to see this." The weapons specialist had been searching the cellar more thoroughly and had uncovered a locked metal box. Breaking it open revealed a cache of documents in Arabic and Russian, along with several maps. Carter examined the papers, his limited Russian allowing him to decipher parts of the content. "These are intelligence reports, details of American unit movements, supply lines, vulnerabilities." "Spies?" Donovan asked. More than that, Carter replied, spreading out one of the maps. Look at these markings. They're identifying key infrastructure targets throughout Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. Power plants, water treatment facilities, communications hubs. This goes beyond the war, Donovan realized. This is about the whole region. Carter felt the weight of the discovery. What they had stumbled upon wasn't just a rogue intelligence operation. It was evidence of a long-term strategic plan to destabilize the entire Middle East once American forces withdrew. Before they could discuss further implications, Anderson called from his lookout position at the window. Vehicle approaching, single truck, 3 occupants visible. Carter moved quickly to the window. Through his binoculars, he observed an old Toyota pickup moving slowly along the village's main road. The men inside wore civilian clothes, but their bearing and the way they scanned the surroundings suggested military training. Not locals, Carter decided, too disciplined. Special forces, maybe Iraqi Republican Guard in disguise. How did they find us? Donovan whispered. Carter's mind flashed to Miller, the technical sergeant who had escaped during the earlier firefight. Miller must have reported our heading before he disappeared. Orders, sir? Anderson asked, his M16 already raised. No engagement unless absolutely necessary, Carter decided. We can't risk giving away our position if there are more forces nearby. Donovan, get back to the tank and have Rodriguez prepared for immediate departure. Anderson, cover the north approach. Wilson, stay on that radio. We need an extraction plan now. As his men moved to their assigned tasks, Carter returned to the wounded men. Roberts was awake, his face gray with pain, but his eyes clear. Colonel, he whispered, need to tell you something. Carter knelt beside him. Save your strength, Captain. Roberts shook his head weakly. No time. Reynolds, not what you think. Double agent, working for us, pretending to work for them. Carter felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. What are you saying? Operation was sanctioned. Highest levels, meant to expose Russian network in our ranks. Reynolds, deep cover for years. Carter struggled to process this revelation. If Reynolds was on our side, why did he shoot you? Had to maintain cover. Didn't know you'd react so quickly. Plan was for you to be captured, Reynolds to rescue you later with evidence against the Russians. The pieces rearranged themselves in Carter's mind, creating a different picture than the one he'd constructed. So the mission was a setup from the beginning, but not the way I thought. Roberts nodded slightly. Need to get intelligence back, more important than any of us. A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Carter moved to the window in time to see the truck speeding away, dust billowing behind it. They're leaving, Anderson reported, confusion evident in his voice. Just drove through, looked around, and left. They'll be back, Carter said with certainty, and with reinforcements. We move in 5 minutes. He returned to Roberts. Can you travel? The wounded intelligence officer managed a weak smile. Not going anywhere, Colonel, you know that. Carter did know. Roberts wouldn't survive being moved again, let alone the rough journey ahead. The realization settled like a stone in his chest. I'll stay with him, Reynolds spoke up unexpectedly. The CIA officer had regained consciousness and was struggling to sit up despite his wound. My cover's blown anyway. I'll buy you some time. Carter studied the man he had been ready to execute hours earlier. If Roberts was telling the truth, Reynolds had been playing an impossible role, maintaining deep cover among Russian intelligence assets for years. The betrayal Carter had perceived was in fact the deepest kind of loyalty a man could offer his country. I can't ask you to do that, Carter said quietly. Reynolds managed a pained laugh. You're not asking, Colonel, I'm telling. This was always a one-way mission for me. 5 years embedded with the Russians tends to make one expendable in the eyes of our own people. The bitterness in his voice revealed more than his words. Reynolds had sacrificed everything for his country, including, ultimately, the country's trust in him. What's the play here? Carter asked, professional respect replacing his earlier suspicion. What do you need from us? Take the intelligence, Reynolds replied, nodding toward the documents they had found. Get it to Defense Intelligence Agency Director Wilson directly. No intermediaries. There's a Russian mole on the National Security Council. Codename Peregrine. The documents should identify them. Carter nodded, memorizing the details. And the tanks, the ones disguised as Abrams? Russian psychological operation, Reynolds confirmed, designed to create incidents between coalition forces. Turn allies against each other. Classic Soviet disinformation, but with a new twist using actual military hardware. Carter made his decision. Anderson will stay with you. He has the most medical training. He turned to the weapons specialist. Keep them alive as long as possible. When the Iraqis return, surrender if you can. Your job is to survive until we can send rescue." Anderson's face was grim but determined. "Understood, sir." Carter gathered the intelligence materials and returned to Iron Thunder. Donovan and Rodriguez were already inside, with Wilson finalizing his work on the radio. "Got it working, sir," Wilson reported. "Made contact with the Saudi border patrol. They're sending coordinates for a safe crossing point." "Good work, Sergeant," Carter said, stowing the documents in his waterproof map case. "We're leaving Anderson behind with the wounded. The rest of us are going to make a run for the border." He explained the revelations from Roberts and the new mission parameters. His remaining crew absorbed the information with the adaptability of veteran soldiers. "So we've been working for the good guys all along?" Rodriguez asked, a hint of relief in his voice. "It's more complicated than good guys and bad guys," Carter replied. "We were pawns in an intelligence operation beyond our clearance level. Now we're carrying information that could expose a Russian asset in the highest levels of our government, which makes us targets for both sides," Wilson concluded grimly. "Exactly. We trust no one until we reach DIA Director Wilson personally." As the sun began to set, they made final preparations. Carter said goodbye to Roberts and Reynolds, knowing he would likely never see either man again. The intelligence officers accepted their fate with the stoic resignation of men who had always understood the potential cost of their profession. Anderson would remain with a radio, a sidearm with limited ammunition, and instructions to destroy any sensitive material if capture became inevitable. "Iron Thunder, moving out," Carter ordered as the tank's engine roared to life. They departed the village as darkness fell, heading southwest toward the coordinates provided by the Saudi border patrol. For 3 hours, they made good progress, using night vision to navigate the desert terrain. Carter maintained rotating watch shifts, aware that their pursuers would not give up easily. The intelligence they carried was too valuable, the stakes too high. Near midnight, Wilson spotted the first signs of pursuit. Vehicle lights, approximately 5 kilometers behind us, bearing northeast. Carter studied the distant pinpricks of light through his commander's scope. Multiple vehicles, moving fast, likely Republican Guard or Special Forces. "Can we outrun them?" Donovan asked. "Not cross-country," Carter replied. "The Abrams is powerful but not built for speed over rough terrain. Rodriguez, find us a defensive position somewhere with elevation advantage." Rodriguez scanned the tactical map. "Ridgeline 3 kilometers ahead, sir. Offers cover in fields of fire." "Make for it," Carter ordered. "Maximum speed." Iron Thunder accelerated, its massive turbine engine howling as it pushed the 70-ton vehicle to its limits. The pursuing vehicles gained ground steadily, the distance narrowing to 4 kilometers, then 3. "They'll be in small arms range in 10 minutes, Wilson calculated. "We'll be at the ridge in 7, Rodriguez countered. "If we make it." Carter felt the familiar calm of combat descend over him. Time seemed to slow as his mind processed options and contingencies. They were outnumbered and deep in enemy territory, but they had the most advanced tank in the world and a crew of exceptional skill. "New plan," he announced. "We don't run, we fight." His men looked at him with varying degrees of surprise. "Sir?" Donovan questioned. "They expect us to run for the border," Carter explained. "So we stop, we hide, we let them pass us, then we hit them from behind." A slow smile spread across Wilson's weathered face. "Ambush. I like it." Carter detailed the plan quickly. They would use the ridge not as a defensive position, but as concealment. Rather than climbing to the top, they would position the tank behind a shoulder of rock, power down, and wait. When the Iraqi pursuit passed their position, they would attack from the rear, targeting the lead and trail vehicles first to trap the others. As they reached the ridge, Rodriguez maneuvered the tank into position with expert precision. The massive vehicle became nearly invisible in the shadows of the rock formation. "Power down, night vision only," Carter ordered. "Complete silence until my command." The tank's engine fell silent, and with it the ever-present background hum of the electrical systems. In the sudden quiet, Carter could hear his men breathing, the soft click as Wilson adjusted the main gun's elevation, the metallic whisper as Donovan checked his personal weapon. Outside, the desert night was alive with subtle sounds. The wind across the sand, the distant call of a night bird, the cooling tick of the tank's metal skin contracting in the chill air. Then came the growl of approaching engines. 6 vehicles, Wilson whispered, peering through the thermal sight. Lead and trail are armored personnel carriers. Middle 4 are troop transports. Carter nodded. Approximately 40 personnel if they're at full capacity, plus vehicle crews. Long odds, Donovan commented. We've faced worse, Carter replied with quiet confidence. The Iraqi convoy approached slowly, clearly wary of ambush. Searchlights mounted on the lead vehicle swept the terrain ahead, including the ridge where Iron Thunder waited. Carter held his breath as the light passed over their position, but their concealment held. Minutes stretched like hours as the convoy drew abreast of their position, then began to pass. Carter waited until the lead vehicle was 100 meters beyond them before giving the order. Start engines, weapons free. Target lead vehicle first. Iron Thunder's turbines spooled up with a banshee wail that shattered the desert quiet. The tank lurched forward, emerging from concealment like a predator from its den. On target, Wilson confirmed, the main gun already tracking the lead armored personnel carrier. Fire! The 120mm gun roared, the depleted uranium round covering the distance in milliseconds. The Iraqi vehicle erupted in flames, its fuel and ammunition cooking off in a secondary explosion that lit the night like daylight. Before the Iraqis could react, Wilson had traversed to the trail vehicle and fired again. Another direct hit, another vehicle transformed into a burning wreck. Rodriguez, advance. Get us between them and the border, Carter ordered. Iron Thunder charged forward, its treads throwing rooster tails of sand as it accelerated. The remaining Iraqi vehicles scattered in confusion, their planned pursuit transformed into a desperate fight for survival. Machine gun fire rattled against the Abrams armor, harmless as hail on a tin roof. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked through the darkness, missing wide and exploding against the ridge. Systematic engagement, Carter directed calmly. Wilson, prioritize armed threats. Rodriguez, keep us moving. Don't give them a stationary target. For the next 10 minutes, Iron Thunder dominated the battlefield. The main gun spoke 4 more times, each round finding its mark with devastating effect. The coaxial machine gun chattered continuously, suppressing Iraqi infantry attempting to deploy anti-tank weapons. When the firing finally ceased, 4 vehicles burned in the desert night, and 2 had fled northward, abandoning their comrades. Damage report, Carter called as they secured the perimeter. No penetrations, Donovan reported after checking the tank's diagnostic systems. Minor damage to the right side skirt from RPG fragmentation. All systems operational. Carter allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The ambush had worked perfectly, eliminating their immediate pursuit and sending a message to any other forces that might be searching for them. Iron Thunder was not prey, it was a predator. Collect any useful intelligence from the wreckage, he ordered. Weapons, documents, communication equipment. Then we continued to the border. Donovan and Wilson dismounted, moving cautiously among the destroyed vehicles. They returned 15 minutes later with a collection of weapons, maps, and a modern encrypted radio. Found this on one of the officers, Donovan said, handing Carter a leather case containing documents. Looks like operational orders. Carter examined the papers, his blood running cold as he translated the Arabic text. They weren't just pursuing us. They were searching for something specific. He held up a page containing a detailed technical diagram. The same prototype tank design that was in our original mission briefing. So there really are new tanks? Wilson asked, confusion evident in his voice. Or someone wants everyone to believe there are, Carter replied. This whole operation is layers within layers. As they prepared to continue their journey, Carter studied the maps they had captured. They revealed Iraqi patrol patterns and checkpoint locations, valuable intelligence for planning their route to the border. One detail caught his attention, a facility marked with a special symbol, located 50 kilometers east of their position. The notation beside it was in Russian, not Arabic. Change of plans, Carter announced. Before we head for the border, we're going to check out this facility. Donovan examined the map. Sir, with all due respect, we have critical intelligence that needs to reach American hands. Why risk a detour? Because this facility is marked with the same designation as the prototype tanks in our original briefing, Carter explained. If there really is advanced Soviet technology being tested here, we need to know. His crew exchanged glances, but voiced no further objections. They had followed Carter through hell already. A slight detour wouldn't change that loyalty. Iron Thunder changed course, heading east into territory marked as heavily patrolled by Iraqi forces. They moved cautiously, using dry riverbeds and broken terrain for concealment, stopping frequently to listen for pursuit. Dawn found them overlooking a narrow valley where a cluster of low buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence stood in stark isolation. No roads led to the facility, only a crude airstrip suitable for small cargo planes or helicopters. Minimal security, Wilson observed through his binoculars. 2 guard posts, maybe a dozen personnel visible. No heavy weapons or vehicles that I can see, Donovan added. Doesn't look like a high-value military installation. Carter studied the facility with growing suspicion. That's because it's not Iraqi military. Look at the construction style, the layout. That's Soviet design methodology. He was right. The buildings followed the utilitarian pattern common to Russian military installations during the Cold War. Efficient, Spartan, distinctive to those who had studied Soviet military architecture as Carter had during his training. A Russian base in Iraq, Rodriguez questioned. That doesn't make sense, even with them being allies. It makes sense if what they're doing here is something the Iraqi government isn't supposed to know about, Carter reasoned, or something deniable if discovered. The implications were disturbing. If Russian military or intelligence services were operating independently on Iraqi soil during the Gulf War, it represented a significant escalation of their involvement. We need to get a closer look, Carter decided. Donovan, you're with me. Wilson, Rodriguez, maintain position here with the tank. If we're not back in 2 hours, proceed to the border with the intelligence we've already gathered. Donovan checked his sidearm. Infiltration plan, sir? We wait for a patrol to pass, then approach from the east using that dry creek bed for cover. Observation only. We identify what they're doing here, then extract without engagement if possible. They waited an hour for the perimeter patrol to complete its rotation, then began their approach. The morning heat was already building as they moved through the rocky terrain, using every available piece of cover. Both men were experienced in infantry tactics despite their primary roles as tank crew, and they made steady progress toward the facility. Reaching the chain-link fence, they found a section partially buried by wind-blown sand that they could slide under without cutting. Inside the perimeter, they moved from building to building, careful to avoid the few personnel visible in the compound. The first 2 structures yielded little information. Barracks and administrative spaces with documents in Russian that Carter couldn't fully translate. The third building proved more enlightening. Through a dirty window, they observed what appeared to be a workshop or laboratory. Inside, several men in civilian clothes worked around a large piece of equipment partially covered by tarps. Tank components, Donovan whispered, recognizing the distinctive shape of a turret ring and gun stabilization system. Carter nodded, his suspicions confirmed. This was a development facility for the mysterious tank technology that had been at the center of their original mission. But as he studied the components more carefully, something seemed off. That's not a tank design I'm familiar with, he murmured. The proportions are wrong, and look at that power system they're installing. That's not a standard tank engine. Before Donovan could respond, shouting erupted from the other side of the compound. The perimeter patrol had discovered their tracks leading under the fence. Time to go, Carter said, already moving toward their entry point. They made it halfway across the compound before being spotted. A shout in Russian was followed immediately by gunfire, rounds kicking up dust at their feet. Carter and Donovan returned fire as they ran, not aiming to hit, but to force their pursuers to take cover. They slid under the fence and sprinted toward the ridge where Iron Thunder waited, bullets whining overhead. Start engines, Carter shouted into his radio as they ran. Prepare to suppress enemy position. The Abrams turbine roared to life in the distance, a sound that gave Carter a burst of renewed energy despite his burning lungs and aching legs. They crested a small rise and saw Iron Thunder advancing toward them, its main gun already tracking the facility. Covering fire, Carter gasped into the radio as more bullets kicked up sand around them. Wilson responded immediately. The tank's coaxial machine gun opened up, stitching a line of impacts across the pursuing Russians' position and forcing them to dive for cover. Carter and Donovan reached the tank and scrambled aboard, pulling themselves through the commander's and loader's hatches respectively. Get us out of here, Rodriguez, Carter ordered as soon as they were secure. Iron Thunder reversed course, putting distance between themselves and the facility as the Russians regrouped. Once they were a kilometer away, Carter called a halt to assess the situation. Did you see what they were building, sir? Wilson asked. Not exactly a tank, Carter replied, still catching his breath. Something similar in concept, but different in execution. More like a remotely operated weapons platform. Drone tank? Donovan suggested. Maybe. Whatever it is, it's advanced technology, and it explains the psychological operation with the fake Abrams. They're testing unmanned or minimally crewed combat vehicles designed to create confusion on the battlefield. Carter made a quick decision. We've seen enough. The intelligence we've gathered needs to reach American hands immediately. Rodriguez, plot the most direct course to the Saudi border that avoids known Iraqi positions. As Iron Thunder resumed its journey southwest toward friendly territory, Carter reviewed everything they had learned. The picture that emerged was disturbing. A Russian intelligence operation using Iraqi territory to test next-generation weapons technology while simultaneously running disinformation campaigns designed to fracture the coalition opposing Saddam Hussein. If successful, such operations could extend the Gulf War, increase American casualties, and possibly even prevent a decisive coalition victory. The strategic implications were enormous. 6 hours to the border at current speed, Rodriguez reported from the driver's station. Carter checked their fuel and ammunition status. They were running low on both after the night's engagement, but they had enough to reach safety if they avoided further combat. That hope was shattered 2 hours later when Wilson spotted aircraft on the horizon. Helicopters, 2 of them, bearing 035. Carter raised his binoculars. The silhouettes were unmistakable. Mi-24 Heinz, attack helicopters. The Russian-built gunships were among the most formidable anti-tank platforms in the world, heavily armored and equipped with AT-6 spiral anti-tank guided missiles that could destroy an Abrams under the right circumstances. They found us, Donovan stated the obvious. No, Carter realized with sudden clarity. Not Iraqi. Those are Russian markings. The facility sent their own hunters. The revelation changed everything. They weren't just facing Iraqi forces operating under conventional rules of engagement. They were being pursued by Russian operatives who would do anything to prevent evidence of their activities from reaching the West. Options? Donovan asked. Carter assessed their situation rapidly. Open desert offered no cover from air attack. The Abrams main gun could target helicopters, but hitting such maneuverable targets required luck as much as skill. Their best defensive weapons against aircraft, the tank's machine guns, had limited elevation and range. We need terrain advantage, Carter decided. Rodriguez, make for those hills. We'll use the rocky ground to break their targeting solution. Iron Thunder accelerated toward a series of low, rocky hills visible in the distance. Behind them, the helicopters grew larger, closing the distance with alarming speed. They'll be in missile range in 2 minutes, Wilson warned. Defensive pattern, Carter ordered. Random heading changes every 15 seconds. Don't give them a predictable trajectory. Rodriguez began executing the order immediately, making the 70-ton tank dance across the desert in an unpredictable zigzag pattern. It wouldn't prevent the helicopters from catching them, but it might make a missile lock more difficult to achieve. The first missile launch came just as they reached the edge of the hills. Carter saw the telltale smoke trail an instant before he shouted, "Incoming! Hard right!" Rodriguez threw the tank into a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding the missile's impact point. The explosion sent a shower of sand and rock fragments pattering against their armor. Wilson, target the lead helicopter. High explosive round. Sir, hitting a moving helicopter with the main gun. I know the odds, Sergeant. Take the shot. Wilson aligned the gun, leading the target and adjusting for windage. On target. Fire. The gun roared, the high explosive round streaking toward the lead helicopter. It missed by meters, but the proximity was enough to cause the Russian pilot to break off his attack run, buying them precious seconds to reach better cover. Iron Thunder plunged into the maze of rocky hills, using the terrain to shield itself from direct missile attacks. The helicopters circled overhead, looking for a clear shot, occasionally firing their machine guns when the tank was briefly exposed. We can't stay here forever, Donovan pointed out. They can call for reinforcements, fuel up, and maintain the hunt indefinitely. Carter knew he was right. They needed a decisive action to change the dynamics of this pursuit. New plan, he announced. We're going to set an ambush. Using the terrain to their advantage, they positioned Iron Thunder in a narrow gully with clear sight lines to a small plateau. Carter had Rodriguez pack disturbed earth around their position, partially burying the tank to reduce its thermal signature. From the air, they would appear to be a disabled vehicle, perhaps damaged by earlier missile fire. Now we wait, Carter said, his voice calm despite the danger. When they come in to confirm the kill, Wilson will target the lead helicopter with sabot rounds. Rodriguez, as soon as the first round is away, get us moving to avoid counterfire. They didn't have to wait long. After 20 minutes of searching, the Russian helicopters approached cautiously, circling the apparently disabled Abrams. One descended slowly, moving into position for a clear visual confirmation. Steady, Carter cautioned as Wilson tracked the helicopter through the gunner's sight. Wait until they're fully committed. The helicopter hovered 30 meters above the plateau, its pilot focused on the seemingly abandoned tank below. Now, Wilson fired, the sabot round traveling at supersonic speed. Unlike the earlier miss, this shot found its mark. The depleted uranium penetrator struck the helicopter just below its main rotor assembly, the kinetic energy tearing through metal and machinery. The aircraft spun violently before crashing to the plateau in a fireball of exploding fuel and ammunition. Rodriguez had iron thunder moving before the wreckage hit the ground, the tank surging from its hiding place as the second helicopter frantically maneuvered to respond. "Circle back, get behind that ridge," Carter directed, pointing to a rock formation that would shield them from the remaining helicopter's weapons. As they maneuvered for position, the second pilot made a critical error, descending too low in an attempt to acquire a target lock. Wilson didn't need an order this time. The main gun tracked and fired in one smooth motion, the round missing the helicopter but passing close enough to send the pilot into an evasive maneuver that brought him dangerously close to the ground. The Russian aircraft clipped a rock outcropping with its tail rotor, sending it into an uncontrollable spin that ended with the helicopter crashing into the hillside. Silence fell over the desert battlefield, broken only by the distant crackle of burning wreckage. "Confirm status of both targets," Carter ordered, unwilling to assume victory prematurely. Donovan used the thermal sight to examine both crash sites. No movement, no heat signatures, suggesting survivors. Both aircraft destroyed. Carter allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Against overwhelming odds, his crew had prevailed through skill, teamwork, and sheer determination. "Rodriguez, resume course to the border. Maximum speed. We've announced our presence rather dramatically, and there will be additional forces converging on this position soon." As Iron Thunder emerged from the hills and accelerated across open desert, Carter checked their position against the captured maps. They were approximately 50 kilometers from the Saudi border, perhaps 3 hours at their current speed. "Status report," he requested. "Fuel at 20%, Rodriguez reported, enough to reach the border with a small reserve. Main gun ammunition down to 6 rounds, Wilson added. 3 sabot, 2 heat, 1 canister. Coaxial machine gun at 30%, Donovan concluded. Commander's 50 cal has 300 rounds remaining. Limited resources, but sufficient if they avoided major engagements. Carter allowed himself to hope that they might complete their mission successfully after all. That hope dimmed 2 hours later when Donovan spotted a dust cloud on the horizon ahead of them. "Vehicle formation approaching from the south," he reported, "directly between us and the border." Carter studied the approaching vehicles through his commander's optics. Iraqi mechanized infantry, 3 BMPs, 2 tanks, and support vehicles. "We don't have the ammunition for a sustained engagement," Wilson reminded him unnecessarily. "No," Carter agreed, "but we don't need to destroy them, just break through their line." He quickly outlined his plan. They would approach at maximum speed, using their remaining sabot rounds to target the 2 tanks at long range before they could effectively return fire. Then they would charge through the gap in the Iraqi formation, relying on their superior speed and the shock effect to prevent an organized response. "Once we're past them, we make straight for the border," Carter concluded. "The Iraqis won't pursue us into Saudi territory with coalition forces present." His crew acknowledged the plan without objection. They had come too far to turn back now. Iron Thunder accelerated to its top speed, a plume of dust marking its approach across the desert floor. The Iraqi forces spotted them quickly, vehicles maneuvering into defensive positions. "Range to lead tank?" Carter asked. 3,000 meters and closing, Wilson reported. "Almost an optimal firing range for sabot rounds. Target the leftmost tank first, then the right. Fire as soon as you have a solution." "Roger that, on target." The main gun fired, the tank rocking slightly with the recoil. Through his sight, Carter watched the depleted uranium round strike the Iraqi T-72 squarely in the turret face, penetrating its armor and likely killing everyone inside instantly. Before the Iraqis could respond, Wilson had traversed to the second tank and fired again. Another direct hit, another vehicle disabled. "Weapons free on all targets," Carter ordered as they closed the distance. "Rodriguez, prepare to punch through their center at my command." The coaxial machine gun opened up, suppressing the infantry carriers as Iron Thunder bore down on the Iraqi position like an unstoppable force of nature. At 500 meters, Carter gave the order. "Now, full speed through the gap!" Rodriguez pushed the throttle to maximum, the turbine engine screaming as it delivered every available horsepower to the tracks. Iron Thunder surged forward, an armored juggernaut moving at over 40 miles per hour. The Iraqis, stunned by the sudden destruction of their tanks and the charging behemoth bearing down on them, broke formation. Some vehicles attempted to intercept but were too slow or too cautious. Others fired wildly, rounds missing the fast-moving Abrams or glancing harmlessly off its sloped armor. Iron Thunder smashed through the Iraqi line, crushing a technical vehicle that couldn't move aside quickly enough. Machine gun fire pursued them briefly before they outpaced the maximum effective range of the Iraqi weapons. "We're clear," Donovan reported, watching the Iraqi forces recede in the distance. "They're not pursuing." "Distance to border?" Carter asked. 10 kilometers, Rodriguez replied. 15 minutes at current speed. Carter allowed himself to breathe more easily for the first time in days. They had done it. Against incredible odds, they had survived battles with Russian and Iraqi forces, gathered critical intelligence, and were minutes away from friendly territory. Then Wilson's voice shattered the moment of relief. "Contact, 2 o'clock, fast-moving vehicle." Carter swung his optics to the indicated bearing. A single vehicle was paralleling their course, moving at extreme speed across the desert. Not a tank or conventional military vehicle, but something low and fast. "What the hell is that?" Donovan asked, peering through his own sight. Recognition dawned on Carter as the vehicle drew closer. "It's one of them, the prototype we saw being built at the Russian facility." The vehicle was unlike anything they had encountered before. Lower than a conventional tank, with a sleek profile and what appeared to be a remotely operated weapon station rather than a traditional turret. It moved with unnatural precision across the rough terrain, suggesting advanced suspension and possibly autonomous control systems. "It's trying to cut us off from the border," Carter realized. "Wilson, target it with our last sabot round." Wilson traversed the main gun, tracking the fast-moving target. "Sir, it's moving erratically. I can't get a solid solution." The prototype vehicle suddenly accelerated, cutting across their path toward a position that would allow it to intercept them before they reached the border. "Hold fire," Carter ordered, reconsidering. "Save the ammunition. Rodriguez, can we outrun it?" The driver studied their relative speeds and courses. "Not on this terrain, sir. It's faster and more agile." Carter made a quick decision. "Change course. Head directly for the border at the closest point. We'll force a confrontation on our terms." Iron Thunder altered course, no longer trying to evade the prototype but racing it to the border. The mysterious vehicle responded immediately, accelerating to intercept. 5 kilometers to the border, Rodriguez reported tensely. "They'll cut us off at 3 kilometers if they maintain current speed." "Options?" Donovan asked. Carter considered their limited resources and the unknown capabilities of their pursuer. They couldn't outrun it. They had minimal ammunition remaining. But they did have one advantage: the collective experience and determination of 4 men who had fought through hell together. "Rodriguez, maintain a course, but be prepared to execute a combat break on my command. Wilson, load heat round and target center mass of the vehicle when it comes into view. We're going to let it get close, then hit it with everything we have simultaneously." The distance to interception closed rapidly. 2 kilometers, 1.5. The prototype vehicle was now clearly visible, a low, angular shape throwing up a rooster tail of sand as it raced toward their position. "Stand by," Carter said, his voice steady despite the tension. "Wait for my mark." At 800 meters, when the prototype was committed to its intercept course, Carter gave the order. "Now, combat break and fire." Rodriguez executed the maneuver perfectly, the tank's tracks locking on one side while maintaining power on the other. Iron Thunder pivoted violently, bleeding speed but bringing its main gun directly in line with the approaching vehicle. Wilson fired the instant he had a target lock. The high explosive anti-tank round streaked toward the prototype, striking it squarely in the front glacis plate. The explosion was tremendous, sending pieces of advanced armor and electronics flying in all directions. But incredibly, the vehicle continued moving, though at reduced speed and trailing smoke and debris. "It's still operational," Donovan reported in disbelief. "That hit should have destroyed it completely." Carter didn't hesitate. "Canister round, load and fire as soon as ready." Wilson and Donovan worked in perfect unison, loading the specialized round designed for anti-personnel use. Against the damaged prototype, it might be enough to disable critical systems. "Ready! Fire!" The canister round erupted from the main gun, spreading hundreds of tungsten balls in a cone of destruction that enveloped the prototype. The effect was devastating, shredding external sensors, weapons mounts, and vision systems. The vehicle slowed, weaving erratically, but still advancing. "It won't die," Wilson muttered, a note of superstitious dread in his voice. "Last heat round," Carter ordered. "Target the same impact point as the first." As Donovan loaded the final high-explosive round, the prototype suddenly accelerated directly toward them, as if making a final suicide charge. "Fire as soon as ready," Carter urged. Wilson acquired the target, now merely 300 meters away and closing fast. "On target! Fire!" The main gun roared one final time. The heat round found its mark, penetrating the already damaged frontal armor of the prototype and detonating inside its hull. The vehicle erupted in a massive fireball, secondary explosions tearing it apart from within as ammunition and fuel ignited. The burning wreckage ground to a halt 100 meters from Iron Thunder, black smoke billowing into the desert sky. "Target destroyed," Wilson confirmed, his voice reflecting both professional satisfaction and profound relief. Carter wasn't taking any chances. "Rodriguez, get us to the border now. We don't know if there are more of those things out there." Iron Thunder resumed its course towards Saudi territory, the crew watching tensely for any sign of further pursuit. None materialized. 2 kilometers later, they crossed an invisible line in the sand that marked the international border. On the Saudi side, a patrol of coalition forces had already been alerted to their approach. American M1 Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles formed a perimeter, weapons trained cautiously on the battered tank approaching from Iraqi territory. Carter opened the commander's hatch and stood, hands raised to show he was American. A tense radio exchange followed, authentication codes were verified, and finally Iron Thunder was welcomed back to friendly lines. As Carter climbed down from the tank, exhaustion nearly overwhelming him after days of continuous combat and minimal sleep, he took a moment to place his hand on Iron Thunder's battle-scarred hull. The machine had carried them through impossible odds, a testament to American engineering and the indomitable spirit of the men who crewed her. A group of officers approached, led by a stern-faced colonel from military intelligence. "Colonel Carter," the man greeted him formally. "I'm Colonel Harris, CENTCOM Intelligence. I understand you have information of critical importance." Carter nodded, retrieving the waterproof case containing the documents they had recovered. "For Director Wilson's eyes only. Defense Intelligence Agency, those were my orders." Harris frowned. "I have operational authority here, Colonel. That intelligence needs to be processed immediately." Carter stood his ground, remembering Reynolds' warning about a Russian mole with high-level access. "With respect, sir, I've fought through Russian special forces, Iraqi Republican Guard, and experimental weapon systems to bring this information back. It goes to Director Wilson personally, or it stays with me." The standoff might have escalated further had a helicopter not chosen that moment to land nearby. From it emerged a tall, distinguished man in civilian clothes, accompanied by military officers bearing general stars. "Director Wilson," Colonel Harris identified the civilian with evident surprise. "We weren't expecting you at the forward operating base." "I go where the intelligence leads me, Colonel," Wilson replied mildly, approaching Carter. "And right now, it led me here. You must be Colonel Carter." Carter straightened to attention despite his exhaustion. "Yes, sir." "At ease, Colonel. I understand you've brought something for me." Carter handed over the document case. "As ordered by Captain Roberts and Agent Reynolds, sir." A flicker of emotion crossed the director's face at the names. "They didn't make it?" "They stayed behind to buy us time, sir, along with Specialist Anderson." Wilson nodded grimly. "Their sacrifice will be honored, Colonel, though perhaps not publicly for some time." He opened the case and scanned the documents briefly, his expression revealing nothing of their significance. "You and your men have performed an extraordinary service, Colonel Carter, one that may have prevented a strategic catastrophe. I'd like to debrief you personally, but first, get some rest. You've earned it." As Wilson turned to leave, Carter called after him. "Sir, what about Peregrine?" The director froze, then turned back slowly. "What do you know about Peregrine?" "Only that it's the code name for a Russian asset on the National Security Council, and that the evidence to identify them is in those documents." Wilson studied him with newfound respect. "Reynolds told you that, I assume. He wasn't supposed to, but I'm glad he did. It confirms you're who you claim to be." "Will you find the mole, sir?" "We already have, Colonel. What we lacked was proof that would stand up in a court of law. You've just provided it." As Director Wilson departed with the intelligence materials, Carter rejoined his exhausted crew. Wilson, Donovan, and Rodriguez stood beside Iron Thunder, their faces etched with fatigue but also quiet pride. "What happens now, sir?" Donovan asked. Carter looked at the men who had followed him through hell, who had trusted him with their lives, and who had performed beyond any reasonable expectation of duty. "Now we go home, Major. We've done our part." But even as he spoke the words, Carter knew that the reverberations of their mission would continue long after they left the desert. The intelligence they had gathered would expose a Russian operation at the highest levels of American government. The prototype weapon they had destroyed represented a new generation of warfare that would shape conflicts for decades to come. And somewhere in Washington, the revelation of a high-level mole would send shockwaves through the corridors of power. Iron Thunder's war was over, but for Colonel William Carter, the battle for truth was just beginning. Back in the West Point auditorium, the aged Colonel Carter paused in his narrative. The cadets sat in rapt silence, many leaning forward in their seats as if physically drawn into the story. The official record states that our tank was separated from our unit during the advance and encountered enemy forces while attempting to rejoin friendly lines, Carter continued. It makes no mention of the Russian facility, the prototype weapon, or the intelligence operation that brought us there in the first place. He ran his hand along the polished surface of the Abrams tank displayed on the stage. Iron Thunder was quietly retired from service, officially due to battle damage that made repairs economically unfeasible. In reality, the technology we encountered in that prototype vehicle was decades ahead of its time. Autonomous weapon systems that could identify and engage targets without human intervention. The precursors to the drone warfare and robotic combat systems being developed today. Carter's gaze swept across the young faces before him. The war you will fight is not the war I fought. The battlefields change, the weapons evolve, but the fundamental truths of leadership remain constant. Integrity, courage, and the willingness to stand for what's right, even when it costs you. He straightened, his weathered face solemn but resolute. That is the legacy of Iron Thunder. Not just a machine of war, but a testament to the human spirit that guides it. As applause filled his auditorium, Carter caught the eye of his grandson in the third row. The young man's face showed a new understanding, a deeper appreciation for the complex realities of military service. The true legacy was not in the medals or the official histories, but in the values passed from one generation to the next. The legacy of men who faced impossible odds with courage and honor. The legacy of Iron Thunder. The Pentagon's polished corridors gleamed under fluorescent lighting as Colonel William Carter made his way toward the secure briefing room. 3 weeks had passed since Iron Thunder crossed the Saudi border. 3 weeks of debriefings, medical evaluations, and the peculiar isolation that follows extraordinary events. His uniform felt strange after days in desert combat gear, the weight of additional ribbons and commendations somehow heavier than body armor. Carter checked his watch. 10 minutes until the National Security Council briefing. Director Wilson had been clear about the stakes. Today they would reveal the identity of Peregrine, the Russian asset who had compromised American security at the highest levels. The evidence Iron Thunder's crew had recovered was the final piece in a counterintelligence operation years in the making. A familiar figure waited by the briefing room doors. Major Michael Donovan had lost weight since their ordeal, his face leaner but his eyes sharper. The promotion had come through yesterday, a partial acknowledgement of his service behind enemy lines. "Colonel," Donovan greeted him with a crisp salute that transitioned into a warm handshake. "Good to see you, sir." "You too, Mike. How's the arm?" Donovan flexed his left arm, which had been grazed by shrapnel during their final engagement. "Good as new. Doctors cleared me for full duty yesterday." Carter nodded, pleased. "Any word on Sergeant Wilson or Specialist Rodriguez?" "Wilson's still at Walter Reed, physical therapy for his knee, but the doctors say he'll make a full recovery. Rodriguez shipped out to Germany yesterday, new assignment with the 1st Armored Division." Carter felt a pang of regret that their team had been dispersed so quickly. The bonds formed in combat were unlike any other, particularly after what they had endured together. "And Anderson?" Carter asked, though he suspected the answer. Donovan's expression darkened. "Still listed as missing in action, the search and rescue teams found no trace at the village. Either the Iraqis took him when they found Roberts and Reynolds, or—" He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew the brutal realities of war. "Reynolds?" confirmed KIA. His body was recovered during the ceasefire negotiations. Roberts too. Carter absorbed this information silently. Both men had died ensuring that Iron Thunder's mission succeeded, their sacrifices known only to a handful of people with sufficient clearance. "Sir," Donovan said hesitantly, "there's something you should know before we go in there. The political climate has shifted since we returned. The war is over. Kuwait is liberated. The administration is enjoying approval ratings in the stratosphere. And they don't want anything rocking that boat," Carter concluded, understanding instantly, "including exposing a Russian asset in the National Security Council." Exactly. There are whispers that certain parties want this handled quietly. Administrative discharge for the mole, no public trial, no embarrassing headlines about infiltration at the highest levels. Carter felt a surge of anger but kept his expression neutral. That's Director Wilson's call. All we can do is present the facts. Yes, sir, Donovan agreed, though his tone suggested he shared Carter's frustration. They entered the briefing room to find it already half full. Joint Chiefs representatives, intelligence officials, and senior military officers occupied one side of the long table. Civilians in expensive suits, presumably from the National Security Council and State Department, sat opposite. At the head of the table, Defense Intelligence Agency Director Wilson conversed quietly with a silver-haired man Carter recognized as the National Security Advisor, Lawrence Chambers. Carter and Donovan took their assigned seats near Director Wilson. As they settled in, Carter noticed a thin file folder at each place, marked with the highest security classification. The dossier on Peregrine, presumably. The room quieted as Chambers called the meeting to order. Gentlemen, we're here to discuss a sensitive counterintelligence matter. Director Wilson will lead the briefing. I remind everyone that what is said in this room is classified above top secret and compartmentalized on a strict need-to-know basis. Wilson stood, his tall frame commanding attention. Thank you, Mr. Chambers. 3 weeks ago, an intelligence operation codenamed Iron Forge culminated in the recovery of documents proving that a high-level American official has been passing classified information to Russian intelligence services. This individual, codenamed Peregrine by his handlers, has had access to our most sensitive military and diplomatic secrets for at least 5 years. Carter watched the faces around the table. Most registered appropriate shock or concern, but a few remained carefully blank, giving nothing away. The evidence was recovered by a special operations team led by Colonel William Carter. Wilson continued, nodding toward Carter. Colonel Carter's team penetrated deep into Iraqi territory to recover this intelligence at great risk, and with the loss of several American operatives. Yes, very heroic, Chambers interrupted, his tone dismissive. But before we proceed further, I must raise concerns about the provenance of this so-called evidence. Documents recovered in a war zone, possibly planted by Iraqi intelligence, hardly constitute ironclad proof. Carter felt his jaw tighten but remained silent. This was the pushback Donovan had warned him about. Wilson seemed unsurprised by the challenge. The documents include communication logs, bank transfer records, and most importantly, handwritten notes from Peregrine himself, which our forensic analysts have confirmed match the handwriting of the individual in question. And who exactly is being accused here? Chambers demanded. These vague insinuations are highly irregular. Wilson opened his folder and removed a photograph. The evidence points conclusively to this man, Deputy National Security Advisor Edward Harrison. Murmurs spread around the table. Harrison was Chambers' right-hand man, widely respected and reportedly in line for greater things in the administration. Preposterous, Chambers declared. Edward Harrison has served this country with distinction for 20 years. These allegations are not only false, but frankly offensive. They are also, said a quiet voice from the doorway, absolutely correct. All heads turned to see Edward Harrison himself enter the room. He looked composed, almost serene as he took an empty chair at the far end of the table. Edward, Chambers sputtered, you don't need to dignify these accusations with a response. We'll have this matter dismissed immediately. Harrison smiled thinly. That won't be necessary, Lawrence. Director Wilson is quite right. I have been providing information to Moscow for years, though I prefer to think of myself as a strategic balancing force rather than a mole. The room fell silent, the stark confession hanging in the air. Why, Edward? Chambers finally asked, his face ashen. Why betray your country? Betray? Harrison repeated the word as if testing it. I've always served the greater good, Lawrence. Sometimes that meant looking beyond narrow American interests to consider global stability. The world needs checks and balances. No single superpower should dominate unchallenged. Carter studied the man who had compromised American security for years. Harrison showed no shame, no regret, only the calm certainty of a true believer in his own righteousness. You'll cooperate fully with our investigation, Wilson said. It wasn't a question. Of course, Harrison agreed amicably. Though I suspect you'll find my true value is in what I know about Russian intelligence operations, not in prosecuting me publicly. A quiet retirement might serve everyone's interests better than a messy trial, don't you think? Carter couldn't remain silent any longer. Men died to expose what you've done. Good men who believed in this country, and you think you deserve a quiet retirement. Harrison regarded him with something like pity. Colonel Carter, the heroic tank commander, tell me, how many Iraqis did you kill in your quest for these documents? How many lives were sacrificed for this moment? And what has it achieved beyond embarrassing the administration and potentially destabilizing international relations just as a new world order is taking shape? Justice, Carter replied simply. Accountability, the principles that separate us from those you served. Harrison's expression hardened slightly. You military men see everything in such black and white terms. The world is more complex than battlefield objectives, Colonel. Enough, Director Wilson interrupted. Mr. Harrison, you'll be taken into custody pending formal charges. This meeting is adjourned. As security personnel entered to escort Harrison away, Carter noticed Chambers and several other officials huddled in urgent conversation. The political machinery was already working to contain the damage, to shape the narrative. He suspected Harrison might get his quiet retirement after all, justice sacrificed on the altar of political expediency. Director Wilson approached as the room cleared. You did your part, Colonel. The rest is beyond your control. What happens now, sir? Carter asked, though he already knew the answer. Now the system works its Byzantine magic, Wilson replied wearily. Harrison will likely receive a deal in exchange for information about Russian operations. The administration will bury the scandal as deeply as possible, and you and your men will receive commendations that can never mention what you really did or why it mattered. The prototype weapon, Carter prompted, the unmanned tank. What about that? That, Wilson said with a hint of genuine enthusiasm, is the silver lining. Your encounter with that platform advanced our understanding of Russian autonomous weapons development by years. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency is already incorporating what we learned into our own systems. Carter nodded, taking cold comfort in that at least. And my men, what happens to them? Distinguished service medals all around, promotions for those eligible, and reassignment to posts where they won't be asked uncomfortable questions about their time in Iraq. Scattered to the winds, Carter murmured, disliking how easily his team was being dispersed. For their protection as much as anything, Wilson countered. Harrison wasn't working alone. There may be other Russian assets we haven't identified yet. Better to have your team separated and safe than together and vulnerable. Carter couldn't argue with the logic, even as he resented its necessity. What about Anderson? He's still missing. Wilson's expression softened slightly. We're continuing search efforts through diplomatic channels now that the ceasefire is in effect. If he's alive, we'll find him. The director checked his watch. I have to brief the president in an hour. You're scheduled to receive the Distinguished Service Cross tomorrow at the Pentagon ceremony. After that, your new orders will take effect. New orders, sir? You're being promoted to full colonel and assigned to the Army War College faculty. Strategic Studies Department. Considering your recent experiences, I can't think of anyone better qualified to teach the next generation about asymmetric warfare and emerging threats. Carter accepted this news with mixed emotions. A prestigious posting, certainly, but also a graceful way to move him out of operational command and into academia, where his knowledge of classified operations would be contained. Thank you, sir, he said formally, recognizing that the decision had already been made. As Wilson departed, Donovan approached. I heard, War College. Congratulations, sir. And you, Major? Where are they sending you? Pentagon, Office of Net Assessment, analyzing future warfare technologies. Carter smiled faintly. They're keeping us busy in places where we can't cause trouble. But not together, Donovan noted. Divide and conquer. Take care of yourself, Mike. Keep in touch as much as security allows. They shook hands, both knowing that the demands of compartmentalized intelligence work would likely prevent much contact in the years ahead. As Carter left the Pentagon that evening, he felt an odd sense of displacement. The mission was over. The truth, or some version of it, had been acknowledged. Yet justice remained elusive, victory incomplete. He thought of his crew, scattered now across military postings worldwide, of Anderson, still missing, of Reynolds and Roberts, who had died believing their sacrifices would matter. Somewhere in the Iraqi desert, Iron Thunder's tracks were already being erased by the shifting sands. But the truth of what happened there could not so easily be buried. 6 months later, Colonel Carter stood before his first class at the Army War College. 50 of the Army's most promising majors and lieutenant colonels looked back at him, notebooks open, expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Many had served in Desert Storm. A few had combat decorations that hinted at experiences not unlike his own. Modern warfare, Carter began. exists in the space between technology and human judgment, between what machines can do and what men and women must decide. He activated the classroom display, showing an aerial photograph of the Iraqi desert with a burned area visible at its center. Only Carter knew this marked the site where Iron Thunder had destroyed the Russian prototype autonomous tank. The weapons of the future will challenge our understanding of combat in fundamental ways, he continued. Autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, remote operations. The lines between human and machine decision-making are blurring, and with them, the ethical frameworks that have governed warfare for centuries. A hand raised in the back row. Colonel, are you referring to drone technology? Because the Air Force has been developing remotely piloted vehicles for years. I'm talking about something more fundamental, Major, Carter replied. Imagine a battlefield where weapon systems make targeting decisions without human input, where algorithms determine who lives and who dies, where the soldier's role is increasingly to monitor rather than to control. Another student spoke up. Sir, with respect, that sounds like science fiction. Carter smiled slyly. 20 years ago, so did the GPS-guided munitions you used in Iraq. The future arrives faster than we expect, and rarely in the form we anticipate. He changed the display to show the burned hulk of a Soviet T-72 tank. During Desert Storm, American tanks engaged Iraqi armor at ranges exceeding 3 kilometers, often destroying targets before the enemy was even aware of their presence. That technological overmatch defined the conflict. Now imagine if those Iraqi tanks had operated without crews, if they could coordinate their movements using artificial intelligence, if they could learn from each engagement, adapting their tactics in real time. The classroom was silent now, students fully engaged. That is the future we must prepare for, Carter continued, not because it might happen, but because elements of it are already in development, in Russia, in China, and yes, in our own research facilities. For the remainder of the lecture, Carter outlined the evolution of armored warfare from its origins in World War I through its likely future trajectories. He never mentioned Iron Thunder or the classified mission that had revealed the Russian autonomous tank program. But the experience informed every analysis, every prediction. After class, a lieutenant colonel with intelligence branch insignia approached his desk. Fascinating lecture, Colonel. Your insights on Russian armor development are particularly incisive. Almost as if you've seen their next-generation systems firsthand. Carter met the man's gaze evenly. I've studied the available intelligence reports carefully, Colonel. Danforth, Marcus Danforth, Defense Intelligence Agency. The man offered his hand. Director Wilson suggested I audit your course. He speaks very highly of your analytical capabilities. Carter understood immediately. This was no ordinary student, but a DIA handler, monitoring what Carter chose to reveal about his classified experiences. Always glad to have DIA perspective in the classroom, Carter replied neutrally. I wonder if you might have time for coffee, Colonel. I'd value your thoughts on a technical question regarding the Russian T-14 Armada development program. This was clearly not a request, but a summons. Of course. The officers' club in 15 minutes? Perfect. As Danforth departed, Carter gathered his teaching materials, wondering what the intelligence officer really wanted. The T-14 Armada was Russia's newest main battle tank, still in development according to official sources, though rumors suggested prototypes were already being tested. At the officers' club, Danforth led them to a secluded corner table before producing a folder stamped with security classifications. These satellite images were taken 3 weeks ago at a proving ground outside Omsk. Carter examined the photographs. They showed a low silhouetted vehicle with an unmanned turret conducting firing trials. The design was evolutionary rather than revolutionary, but one detail caught his attention. The sensor package on the turret, he said, pointing to a particular feature. That's similar to what we encountered on the prototype in Iraq. Danforth nodded. We believe the Russians salvaged key technologies from that program and integrated them into the Armada. Your after-action reports were instrumental in helping our analysts identify these components. Why show me this now? Because we've received intelligence suggesting the Russians are accelerating the program, and because there's something else you should see. Danforth produced another photograph, this one showing a medical facility. This was taken at a military hospital in Baghdad last month during a Red Cross inspection visit. Carter studied the image, his heart suddenly racing. In the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was a figure in a wheelchair. Despite the poor quality of the image and the months of captivity evident in the man's gaunt frame, Carter recognized him immediately. Anderson, he breathed. Specialist Thomas Anderson, Danforth confirmed. Very much alive, though not in good condition according to our sources. The Iraqis are treating him as a high-value prisoner, keeping him isolated from other POWs. We believe he's being interrogated about what he might know regarding the Russian prototype in your mission. Carter felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Anderson had survived, anger that he remained captive, guilt that he had been left behind. We're getting him out, Carter said. It wasn't a question. That's more complicated than it sounds. The ceasefire agreement includes POW exchanges, but the Iraqis don't officially acknowledge holding Anderson. Diplomatic efforts have hit a wall. Then what's the alternative? Danforth hesitated. Director Wilson is considering options. He thought you should know the situation before any decisions are made. Carter understood the subtext. A rescue operation was being contemplated, one that would likely require specific knowledge of Anderson's location, condition, and the facility where he was being held. I'm teaching strategic studies at the War College now, Carter said carefully. Not exactly in a position to assist with operational planning. Of course, Danforth agreed smoothly. This was merely an informational briefing. Though if you have any insights that might help Director Wilson in his deliberations, I'd be happy to convey them. Carter considered his response. His first instinct was to volunteer immediately for any mission to rescue Anderson. But years of military experience had taught him to think strategically, to consider second and third order effects. Tell Director Wilson that any operation would need precise intelligence on the security protocols at that facility. If the Iraqis are keeping Anderson isolated, they likely have special procedures in place. And tell him that whoever goes needs to understand that this isn't just about rescuing an American soldier. It's about preventing the Russians from obtaining technical information about their prototype's engagement with an M1 Abrams. Danforth nodded, clearly satisfied with this response. I'll convey your analysis. Would you like to be kept informed of developments? Yes, Carter said firmly. Anderson was under my command. I have a responsibility to him. After Danforth departed, Carter remained at the table, thoughts churning. Anderson was alive but captive, being interrogated about a classified mission that officially never happened. The Russians were accelerating their autonomous tank program, incorporating lessons learned from Iron Thunder's engagement with their prototype. And somewhere in the Pentagon, plans were being developed for an operation that might require Carter's specialized knowledge, despite his current academic posting. The past was not past at all, but reaching forward to shape the future in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. 2 days later, Carter received a message requesting his presence at a secure facility in Northern Virginia. The unmarked building housed a special operations planning cell, its existence known only to those with specific operational needs. Inside, he was surprised to find not only Director Wilson and Colonel Danforth, but also a familiar face he hadn't expected to see again so soon. Major Donovan, Carter greeted his former executive officer. I thought you were analyzing future technologies at the Pentagon. I was, Donovan replied, until yesterday when I received temporary reassignment to this task force. Director Wilson gestured for them to take seats at the conference table. Gentlemen, this meeting never happened. You were never here. What we discussed does not exist in any official capacity. Standard preamble for black operations, Carter knew. Wilson activated a secure display showing detailed satellite imagery of the Baghdad medical facility where Anderson was being held. We've confirmed that Specialist Anderson is indeed alive and being held at this location. Iraqi security is substantial but not insurmountable. What makes this challenging is that Anderson is regularly visited by Russian military intelligence officers who are debriefing him about his encounter with their prototype autonomous tank. Carter studied the imagery. They're keeping him in the North Wing? Third floor, Wilson confirmed, isolated from other patients with dedicated security. Our latest intelligence suggests he's being moved to another facility within 72 hours, possibly out of the country entirely. Which means we have a rapidly closing window, Danforth added. What's the extraction plan? Carter asked, already suspecting why he had been summoned. Wilson displayed a tactical map. SEAL Team 6 will conduct the extraction, infiltrating by helicopter under cover of darkness. However, they need specific intelligence on the facility layout, security protocols, and Anderson's precise condition to maximize chances of success. Intelligence that only someone who served with Anderson might be able to provide, Carter concluded. Precisely. We need an advance operative to enter Baghdad under diplomatic cover, conduct reconnaissance of the target, and potentially make contact with Anderson to prepare him for extraction. Carter saw where this was heading, and you want me to be that operative. You know Anderson better than anyone. You're familiar with what information he possesses that the Russians want, and you have combat experience that would prove invaluable if complications arise. With respect, sir, I'm a tank commander, not a spy. Covert infiltration isn't exactly my specialty, which is why you'll have assistance, Wilson replied, nodding to Donovan. Major Donovan has received training in covert operations as part of his Pentagon role. He'll accompany you to Baghdad. Carter looked at his former XO, who shrugged slightly. Apparently, analyzing future warfare technology includes occasional field research. This is strictly voluntary, Wilson emphasized. The operation carries significant risk. If you are captured, the United States will deny any knowledge of your actions. Given your previous mission in Iraq, I wouldn't blame you for declining. Carter didn't hesitate. Anderson was under my command. I left him behind once. I won't do it again. Wilson nodded, unsurprised. I thought you might say that. You and Major Donovan will deploy immediately, traveling under diplomatic cover as military attachés conducting a humanitarian assessment. Once in Baghdad, you'll have 48 hours to gather the necessary intelligence before the SEAL team arrives for extraction. And if we determine the SEAL plan isn't viable, Donovan asked, then you abort and extract via the diplomatic pouch. This isn't a rescue mission for you two. Your job is intelligence gathering and preparation only. Carter suspected that distinction might blur in the field, but he kept that thought to himself. When do we leave? Tonight. A C-21 is standing by at Andrews Air Force Base. You'll be provided with appropriate documentation and equipment en route. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation, briefings, and the surreal experience of transitioning from Army War College professor to covert operative on a classified mission. By the time their aircraft touched down at Baghdad International Airport, Carter had memorized his cover identity, studied every available piece of intelligence on the target facility, and mentally prepared himself for the complexities ahead. Baghdad, in the aftermath of Desert Storm, was a city of contradictions. The coalition bombing campaign had devastated military and government infrastructure, but much of the city remained intact. Iraqi civilians went about their business under the watchful eyes of Republican Guard checkpoints. International aid workers and UN personnel moved through the streets, their white vehicles a common sight. Carter and Donovan, traveling as Lieutenant Colonel James Miller and Major Robert Davis respectively, took rooms at the Al Rashid Hotel, where most foreign diplomats and military attachés were housed. Their cover as humanitarian assessment officers gave them legitimate reason to visit various facilities around Baghdad, including hospitals. Security is tighter than the briefing suggested, Donovan observed, as they conducted initial reconnaissance from their hotel room balcony. Republican Guard checkpoints every few blocks. Plainclothes intelligence officers watching the hotel entrances. Carter nodded, noting the same details. They're particularly cautious around foreigners. We'll need a compelling reason to visit that specific hospital without arousing suspicion. The Red Cross delegation might be our opening, Donovan suggested. They're conducting an inspection tour of medical facilities tomorrow. If we could attach ourselves to their group, good thinking. Make contact with their team leader tonight. Use the humanitarian assessment angle to justify our inclusion. The plan came together quickly. The Red Cross team leader, a Swiss doctor named Keller, was receptive to having American military representatives join their inspection, seeing it as potentially beneficial for securing additional medical aid. The following morning, Carter and Donovan accompanied the Red Cross delegation to 3 hospitals before reaching their actual target in the early afternoon. The medical facility was a 7-story concrete structure, showing some damage from coalition airstrikes, but still fully operational. Remember, Carter murmured to Donovan as they approached the entrance, we're here to assess general conditions. Show appropriate interest in the main wards, but look for opportunities to gather intelligence on the restricted areas. Donovan nodded almost imperceptibly. Both men carried concealed cameras disguised as pens and watches, ready to document security measures and facility layout. The hospital administrator, a nervous man named Dr. Fahim, led them on a carefully choreographed tour of the lower floors. Carter noted the security presence was indeed substantial, with armed guards at key junctions and a checkpoint controlling access to the upper floors. What treatment occurs on the upper levels? Carter asked innocently as they passed a guarded elevator. Specialized care, Dr. Fahim replied vaguely. Military personnel with specific injuries. Not part of our general inspection tour, I'm afraid. Carter nodded understandingly. Of course. We're primarily interested in civilian care capabilities anyway. As the tour continued, Carter created a distraction by engaging Dr. Fahim in detailed questions about medication supplies, allowing Donovan to separate briefly from the group. The major returned 15 minutes later, rejoining so smoothly that their Iraqi escorts seemed not to have noticed his absence. Only when they were back in their hotel room did Donovan reveal what he had discovered. I managed to access a service stairwell, he reported, sketching a rough map. Made it to the third floor briefly. Heavy security, at least 4 armed guards at the checkpoint. I couldn't get close to Anderson's room, but I overheard nurses discussing a special American patient in room 312. Carter studied the sketch. Security cameras? Basic system, older Soviet technology, focused on hallway approaches and the nurse's station. I noticed blind spots here and here. Donovan indicated areas on his drawing. And the guards? Republican Guard or regular Army? Neither. I think they're intelligence service. No uniforms, professional bearing, concealed sidearms. Carter absorbed this information, adding it to his own observations about the building's exterior security and access points. The SEAL team could enter through the roof, but they'd still need to navigate multiple checkpoints to reach the third floor. There's something else, Donovan added. While I was there, I saw a group of men in civilian clothes being escorted to the restricted area. 2 spoke Russian to each other. They're continuing Anderson's interrogation. Carter's jaw tightened. Then we need to move faster than planned. If the Russians extract actionable intelligence about the prototype's capabilities, it could accelerate their autonomous weapons program by years, Donovan finished. I know. They spent the evening finalizing their intelligence report and transmitting it via secure means to the SEAL team's forward planners. The extraction operation was confirmed for the following night, giving them 1 more day to gather additional details and potentially make contact with Anderson. Carter knew their cover as humanitarian assessors wouldn't get them past the third floor's security checkpoint. They needed a different approach. Medical personnel, he suggested. The night shift changes at 2200 hours, according to our observations. If we could obtain appropriate uniforms and credentials, risky, Donovan cautioned. If we're caught impersonating medical staff, our diplomatic cover won't protect us. I'm open to alternatives. Donovan thought for a moment. What about maintenance? I noticed workers servicing the air conditioning system. Less scrutiny than medical personnel, and a legitimate reason to access restricted areas. The plan took shape quickly. Through contacts provided by their CIA support team, they acquired maintenance worker coveralls and identification badges by the late afternoon. A diagram of the building's ventilation system, ostensibly provided for their humanitarian assessment report, gave them the information needed to justify their presence on the upper floors. That night, Carter and Donovan entered the hospital through a service entrance, their maintenance uniforms and confident demeanor carrying them past initial security with minimal questioning. They carried toolboxes containing actual maintenance equipment alongside concealed communications gear to contact Anderson if possible. The service elevator brought them to the third floor without incident. As they emerged into a utility corridor, Carter could feel the tension in his shoulders. They were now deep in hostile territory with only thin cover identities protecting them. Air conditioning maintenance, Donovan explained in broken Arabic to a guard who questioned their presence. Many complaints about temperature, must check system. The guard scrutinized their identification badges, then gestured for them to proceed, apparently uninterested in the mundane details of hospital maintenance. They moved methodically through the hallways, stopping occasionally to open access panels and make a show of checking equipment. Each stop brought them closer to room 312, where Anderson was reportedly being held. Security camera ahead, Carter murmured, pretending to examine an air vent. We'll need a distraction to reach Anderson's room unobserved. Donovan nodded slightly. I'll create one at the nurse's station. Give me 2 minutes, then make your move. The major moved ahead, toolbox in hand, while Carter continued his pretend maintenance work. Moments later, he heard raised voices from the direction of the nurse's station. Donovan had apparently discovered an urgent problem with the ventilation system that required immediate attention. With security distracted, Carter moved quickly toward room 312. The door was unguarded, though likely locked. He approached as if performing a routine check on the nearby vent, positioning himself to block the security camera's view with his body. The door was indeed locked, but Carter came prepared. From his toolbox, he retrieved a maintenance key provided by their CIA contact, which supposedly opened most interior doors in the facility. His heart pounded as he slipped it into the lock, feeling immense relief when the mechanism clicked open. He entered quickly, closing the door behind him. The room was dimly lit, with medical equipment surrounding a bed where a thin figure lay apparently sleeping. Carter moved closer, immediately recognizing Anderson despite the weight loss and pallor. "Specialist Anderson," he whispered, gently shaking the man's shoulder. "Thomas, it's Colonel Carter." Anderson's eyes flickered open, confusion giving way to disbelief. "Colonel," he rasped, voice weak from disuse or illness. "Am I dreaming?" "Not a dream, son. We're getting you out of here tomorrow night." Anderson struggled to sit up, wincing with pain. "Sir, the Russians, they've been asking questions about the tank, the prototype." "What have you told them?" "Only name, rank, service number. But they're persistent, and they know things they shouldn't about our engagement, about Iron Thunder's capabilities." Carter nodded grimly. This confirmed their fears about the intelligence breach extending beyond Harrison's activities. "Save your strength," he advised. "A SEAL team is coming for you tomorrow night. I need to know if you can move under your own power." Anderson attempted to swing his legs over the side of the bed, his face contorting with effort. "Barely, sir. They've kept me sedated most of the time, and my leg was injured during capture." "Understood. The extraction team will be prepared to carry you if necessary." Carter quickly photographed Anderson's medical chart hanging at the foot of the bed, documenting his condition and medications. "Sir," Anderson said urgently, "there's something else you should know. Reynolds is alive." Carter froze. "That's impossible. His body was recovered during the ceasefire negotiations." "I saw him, sir, 3 days ago. He was brought here for treatment of a gunshot wound. He's being held somewhere in this facility." The implications were staggering. If Reynolds had survived and was now in Russian or Iraqi custody, the entire narrative of the mission changed. The intelligence operative knew details about American counter-espionage operations that would be devastating in enemy hands. "Are you certain it was him?" "Positive, sir. He recognized me, too. We only had eye contact for a moment before they moved him away." Carter made a quick decision. "I'll inform the extraction team. We may need to modify the mission parameters." A noise in the hallway alerted him that time was running short. "Anderson, listen carefully. Tomorrow night, approximately 0100 hours. Be ready to move. If possible, be dressed rather than in a hospital gown." "Yes, sir. I'll be ready." Carter squeezed the young soldier's shoulder. "You've done well, son. Held out under impossible circumstances. We're bringing you home." As he prepared to leave, Anderson caught his arm. "Sir, what they're building? That tank prototype. It's more advanced than we thought. I've overheard things. They're talking about deploying them soon. A whole battalion of autonomous vehicles." "We'll deal with that threat when you're safe," Carter promised. "For now, focus on being ready to move tomorrow." He slipped out of the room as quietly as he'd entered, resuming his maintenance cover and rejoining Donovan, who had successfully occupied the nursing staff with alleged ventilation problems. They completed their circuit of the floor, Carter discreetly signaling that the contact had been made. Within 30 minutes, they were exiting the hospital, their mission accomplished, without raising alarms. Back at the hotel, Carter updated their intelligence report with the critical new information about Anderson's condition and the shocking revelation about Reynolds. "If Reynolds is alive and in enemy hands, this goes beyond a simple extraction operation," Donovan observed. "He knows the identities of our deep cover agents, operational protocols, everything." "Agreed. But attempting to extract 2 prisoners simultaneously increases the complexity and risk exponentially." Carter studied their rough map of the facility. "We need to inform Director Wilson immediately and let the SEAL team commanders adjust the operation as they see fit." The secure transmission is sent within the hour, acknowledging that their intelligence gathering mission was complete and requesting extraction via diplomatic channels the following morning, before the SEAL operation commenced. The response came back quickly and was not what either man expected. "Maintain position, assist SEAL team on site. Reynolds extraction now primary objective." Carter read the message twice to be sure he understood correctly. "They want us to stay and participate in the operation." "Apparently Reynolds is even more valuable than we realize," Donovan commented. "Important enough to risk 4 lives instead of just 1. The revised operational plan arrived an hour later. The SEAL team would still insert via helicopter to the roof, but Carter and Donovan would enter through the main entrance using their maintenance cover identities, timing their arrival to coincide with the SEAL team's breach of the building's upper floors. Their role would be to create a diversion on the lower floors, drawing security personnel away from the extraction targets. It was far beyond their original intelligence-gathering mission, but both men understood the necessity. Reynolds possessed information that could compromise American intelligence operations worldwide. His rescue had become the priority, with Anderson now secondary. Neither man slept much that night. The next day passed with excruciating slowness as they made final preparations, checking their equipment and mentally rehearsing the operation timeline. At 00:30 hours, dressed again in maintenance coveralls, they approached the hospital. The night was moonless, ideal conditions for the SEAL helicopter insertion that would be occurring on the roof in exactly 30 minutes. They passed the external security checkpoint without difficulty, their maintenance cover still intact. Inside, the night shift staff paid them little attention as they made their way toward the hospital's main electrical room, where they would initiate their diversion. At 00:55, 5 minutes before the SEAL team was scheduled to land, Carter nodded to Donovan. "Let's give them something to worry about." Donovan opened the electrical panel they had previously identified and made several strategic connections that would create system failures without endangering patient safety. Lights flickered throughout the building, and then backup generators engaged with a rumble that vibrated through the floors. Alarms began to sound as various systems reported failures. Security personnel moved quickly toward the electrical room, exactly as planned. Carter and Donovan slipped away in the confusion, heading toward the service stairs that would lead them to the third-floor extraction point. Above them, they heard the faint thump of helicopter rotors, almost masked by the building's alarms. The SEAL team had arrived on schedule. As they reached the third floor, chaos was already spreading. The SEAL team had breached the building and was moving efficiently through the hallways, neutralizing resistance with practiced precision. Carter and Donovan rounded a corner to find two SEAL operators outside room 312, one covering the hallway while the other prepared to extract Anderson. "Colonel Carter," one operator acknowledged with a quick nod, "we've secured the primary extraction path. Team 2 is moving to locate Reynolds on the 4th floor. We'll assist Team 2, Carter decided immediately. "Anderson's condition?" "Ambulatory with assistance. We've got him." Carter and Donovan proceeded upward to the 4th floor, where sounds of suppressed gunfire indicated the 2nd SEAL team had encountered resistance. They found the team pinned down in a hallway intersection, unable to advance toward the room where intelligence suggested Reynolds was being held. "4 tangos, heavily armed," the SEAL team leader reported tersely, "positioned with overlapping fields of fire. We need to flank them, but there's no cover." Carter studied the layout, recalling the building plans they had memorized. "There's a patient room 2 doors back. The walls are thin enough that we might be able to breach through to the adjacent corridor and come up behind them." The SEAL leader considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Worth a try. Jackson, Wong, go with these two. We'll maintain suppressing fire from here." Moving quickly, the 4 men entered an empty patient room. One SEAL produced a compact breaching charge, placing it carefully on the wall that separated them from the adjacent corridor. "Fire in the hole," he whispered into his radio, warning the other team members. The controlled explosion was surprisingly quiet but effective, blowing a man-sized hole through the drywall. They moved through immediately, emerging behind the Iraqi security forces that had the other SEALs pinned down. What followed was over in seconds. The Iraqis, suddenly caught between two forces, were neutralized before they could effectively respond. "Clear," the SEAL operator called. "Move to target room." The combined team advanced to the room where Reynolds was reportedly held. Unlike the standard patient rooms, this one had a reinforced door with an electronic lock. "Breach charge," the SEAL leader ordered. As they prepared to blow the door, Carter held up a hand. "Wait, if Reynolds is injured, an explosive breach might cause further harm." He stepped forward, examining the lock. "This is the same system they use on the secure medication cabinets. I saw the maintenance override being used yesterday." From his pocket, Carter produced the maintenance key they had used earlier. It fit the lock perfectly, and with a few skilled manipulations, the door clicked open. Inside, they found not a hospital room, but what appeared to be an interrogation center. Medical equipment had been arranged alongside recording devices and restraint systems. And there, strapped to a gurney, was Reynolds. The CIA operative was barely recognizable. Torture had left visible marks, and his eyes held the vacant stare of a man pushed beyond normal human endurance. But as Carter approached, recognition flickered in his gaze. "Colonel," Reynolds whispered, his voice a ragged remnant, "you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Carter replied as the SEAL medic quickly assessed Reynolds' condition and began removing the restraints. "Anderson said you were alive. We came back for both of you." Reynolds managed a pained smile. "Standard operating procedure. Never leave a man behind." The SEAL team leader interrupted. We need to move now. Extraction helicopter is 2 minutes out. They carefully transferred Reynolds to a collapsible stretcher. Despite his injuries, the CIA man remained alert enough to warn them. Russian team, due back at 0200 for continued interrogation, high-level operators. Carter checked his watch. 0155. The timing couldn't be worse. As if on cue, the radio crackled with an urgent warning from the perimeter security team. Multiple vehicles approaching from the east. Looks like Russian diplomatic plates. Estimate 8 to 10 personnel. Move, the SEAL leader ordered. Primary extraction route to the roof. Double time. They proceeded quickly through the hallways, the SEALs maintaining its security, while Carter and Donovan helped carry Reynolds. At the third floor, they rendezvoused with the team escorting Anderson, who managed to walk with support from 2 operators. Good to see you, Specialist, Carter said as their groups merged. Anderson nodded weakly, but determination showed in his eyes. Ready to go home, sir. They reached the roof access stairwell, just as the sound of shouting indicated their Russian pursuers had discovered the extraction in progress. Gunfire erupted from below, bullets ricocheting off the metal staircase. 2 SEALs turned to provide covering fire, while the rest of the team continued upward with the extraction packages. Carter and Donovan were the last to reach the roof, helping to secure the heavy door behind them. On the rooftop, wind whipped around them as the extraction helicopter approached, its dark form barely visible against the night sky. The SEAL team established a defensive perimeter while the medics prepared Reynolds and Anderson for transport. The door to the stairwell buckled as someone on the other side attempted to breach it. A SEAL operator quickly placed a claymore mine facing the door, connected to a remote detonator. 30 seconds to touchdown, the team leader announced. The helicopter appeared overhead, rotors thudding powerfully as it descended toward the designated landing zone. Carter and Donovan helped position Reynolds for immediate loading once the aircraft was on the ground. The stairwell door exploded outward, the SEAL's claymore detonating in response to the breach attempt. Screams and confusion followed, but they knew it would only delay their pursuers momentarily. The helicopter touched down, its crew chief gesturing urgently for them to approach. Reynolds was loaded first, then Anderson. The SEAL team maintained their perimeter, engaging targets that appeared at what remained of the stairwell entrance. "Colonel Major, you're next," the team leader shouted over the rotor noise. Carter and Donovan made their way to the helicopter, ducking under the spinning blades. As they reached the door, a fusillade of gunfire erupted from a new direction. Russian special forces had accessed the roof from a different route, flanking the SEAL perimeter. Donovan stumbled, struck by at least 1 round. Carter caught him before he fell, dragging him toward the helicopter as SEAL operators provided covering fire. "Go!" Carter shouted to the crew chief as he pulled Donovan aboard. "Everyone's on." The helicopter lifted immediately, banking sharply away from the incoming fire. A medic moved quickly to attend to Donovan, cutting away his shirt to reveal a gunshot wound to the upper chest. "How bad?" Carter asked, helping to stabilize his friend. "Through and through," the medic replied professionally. "Missed the vital organs from what I can tell. He'll make it if we get him to the surgical team quickly enough." Donovan, conscious but in shock, gripped Carter's arm. "Did we get them both out?" Carter nodded, glancing to where Reynolds and Anderson were secured on stretchers. "Mission accomplished, Mike. Both packages extracted." The helicopter raced through the night sky, headed for a forward operating base where medical teams waited. Carter sat beside his wounded friend, reflecting on the operation's success despite the close call. They had rescued Anderson, fulfilling the promise never to leave a man behind. They had recovered Reynolds, preventing a catastrophic intelligence breach. And they had gathered critical information about the Russian autonomous tank program that would inform American defense planning for years to come. Yet as he watched Baghdad recede in the distance, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that this mission, like the one that preceded it, was merely one battle in a longer war. The Russians would continue developing their autonomous weapons. New threats would emerge. The future of warfare was changing in ways few could fully comprehend. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight they had won. 6 months later, Colonel William Carter stood once again before his class at the Army War College. His lecture had evolved, informed by experiences that remained classified but nonetheless shaped his teaching. The future battlefield, that he told his students, will be defined not just by what technology can do, but by the ethical frameworks we establish to govern its use. Autonomous systems may remove human operators from immediate danger, but they can never remove human responsibility for the consequences. After class, he met Major Donovan, now recovered and reassigned as an instructor in the same department. a convenient arrangement that allowed their unique shared experiences to inform curriculum development. Heard from Anderson? Donovan asked as they walked across the campus. Got his letter yesterday. He's doing well at his new post in Germany. Physical therapy twice a week, but he's back on full duty. And Reynolds? Carter shook his head. Still recovering, from what I hear. The Russians did a number on him, but Director Wilson says he's providing valuable intelligence about their operations. They walked in companionable silence for a moment. Two men bound by experiences few others could comprehend. Sometimes I think about Iron Thunder, Donovan said suddenly, sitting in some military storage facility, gathering dust. Carter nodded. I requested she be preserved for historical purposes. Maybe someday, when the missions are declassified, people will understand what that tank and her crew accomplished. And the Russian prototype? Any news on that program? Developing, but slower than they hoped. Our engagement with their test vehicle provided valuable data on vulnerabilities they hadn't anticipated. Director Wilson thinks we set them back at least 5 years. As they reached the parking lot, Carter paused, looking back at the classroom building, where young officers studied the principles of warfare that would guide their careers. The next generation will fight different battles with different weapons, he said thoughtfully. But the fundamentals remain the same: courage, integrity, the willingness to stand for what's right, regardless of cost. The legacy of Iron Thunder, Donovan agreed with a slight smile. No, Carter corrected gently. The legacy of the men who crewed her. The tank was just steel and circuitry. It was the human element that made the difference. As he drove home that evening, Carter reflected on the strange journey that had brought him from the deserts of Iraq to the classrooms of the War College. The official records would never tell the full story of Iron Thunder. The citations and medals he and his crew had received mentioned only extraordinary heroism in combat, with no reference to Russian prototypes or high-level espionage. But the truth existed, preserved in the memories of those who had lived it and in the lessons they passed to the next generation of warriors. In classrooms and training grounds across the country, the experiences of Iron Thunder shaped doctrine, influenced technology development, and informed ethical discussions about the future of autonomous warfare. In the end, Carter thought, that was perhaps the most meaningful legacy of all. Not glory or recognition, but the quiet influence of lessons learned at terrible cost, guiding those who would face tomorrow's challenges. The legacy of Iron Thunder lived on, not in metal and machinery, but in wisdom and preparation for battles yet to come.